Chapter 1289. 40% of the profits might seem like a lot, but it was not unacceptable. Just as Xiaochen had said, without the Sacred Palace faction, it would be impossible for the Skymist sect and the 100 Spirits sect to occupy the Yin Windstone Culvert. Therefore, there were only two outcomes. The first was that everyone would split the profits together. Regardless of whether it was the Skymist sect or the 100 Spirits sect, they would receive a much smaller share of the profits. This was the first outcome. As for the second outcome, it would be a life and death struggle. No one wanted the profits and both sides would suffer. Therefore, the Sacred Palace faction's demand for 40% was actually not much. Xiaochen did not wait for Wang Qikuan's reply and left after leaving a few words behind. Brother Wang, think about it carefully, or you can discuss it with Brother Mu. The Sacred Palace faction wants 40%. As for the remaining 60%, I don't care how you split it. These are my conditions. Give me a reply by tomorrow morning. With that, Xiaochen disappeared into the darkness with the Qing Emperor and returned to the Sacred Palace faction's encampment. Watching Xiaochen's departing figure, Wang Qikuan stood in the same spot for a long time. In the end, he chose to look for Brother Mu. He did not care about Wang Qikuan and Brother Mu's decision. After returning to the Sacred Palace faction's encampment, Xiaochen told everyone about the battle against the Blackstone sect the next day. After telling everyone to get ready, Xiaochen began to regulate his breathing. There was bound to be a great battle tomorrow. Although the 9 great factions were now in an alliance, it would not be easy to defeat the Blackstone sect. As one of the 5 great factions that was second only to the main faction, the Blackstone sect's strength could not be underestimated. Therefore, it was necessary to adjust his condition. The night was deep, like the calm before the storm. The night seemed to be quieter than usual, and even the sound of the wind seemed to have disappeared. On such a quiet night, just as the sky was about to brighten, a guest arrived at the Sacred Palace faction's encampment. It was the leader of the 100 Spirits sect faction, Brother Mu. Brother Mu personally came to meet with Xiaochen. The two of them discussed in the tent for a while before Brother Mu left. After personally seeing Brother Mu off, Xiaochen stood there with a faint smile on his face. Brother Mu had finally agreed, which was not too different from Xiaochen's expectations. As for the final distribution, the Sacred Palace would take 40%, the 100 Spirits sect would take 40%, and the remaining 20% would go to the Skymist sect. This distribution plan was acceptable to both the Sacred Palace and the 100 Spirits sect, but the Skymist sect was the only one who would suffer a loss. But what could they do? If they were not strong enough, they could only get a smaller share. However, while Brother Mu agreed to Xiaochen's conditions, he also raised his own request. In the battle tomorrow, Xiaochen would join forces with Brother Mu to deal with the leader of the Blackstone sect faction, Serene Tian. As the leading disciple of the Blackstone sect, Serene Tian was ranked 6th among the prospective saints of the Heavenly Note sect. It was said that his cultivation had just broken through to the perfection of the Tao Emperor realm a month ago. He was very strong, and Brother Mu alone was not his match. They had to join forces with Xiaochen to have a chance. Xiaochen naturally would not refuse Brother Mu's request. After all of this was based on defeating the Blackstone sect faction. If they were unable to defeat the Blackstone sect faction, then everything they had said before would be empty talk, and no one would benefit at that time. He just broke through to the peak of the Tao Emperor stage a month ago? Xiaochen muttered softly as his gaze seemed to pierce through the veil of night to look at the Blackstone sect's encampment in the distance. The night passed quickly. On the morning of the next day, the 9 great sects that were gathered in the valley started to encircle the Blackstone sect's encampment at the same time. The disciples of the Blackstone sect had naturally noticed the movements of the 9 great sections. At this moment, Serene Tian and the other candidates of the Blackstone sect had received the news within the enormous wooden house at the end of the encampment. Including Serene Tian, a total of 8 candidates of the Blackstone sect had entered Heavenly Yin Valley. Merely in terms of numbers alone, the Blackstone sect had crushed the other sections. At this moment, the 8 of them sat in a circle with Serene Tian at the seat of the head, and he looked at the 7 people below him. Sir Jean Tian said coldly, since they want to court death, then we'll fulfill their wishes. Junior brothers, remember that the outcome of this battle is actually in our hands. Sir Jean Tian had known about the alliance of the 9 great sects since the beginning, but he never cared about it. The reason was very simple, it was because he had absolute confidence in the strength of the Blackstone sect faction. Even if the 9 great sects were to form an alliance, the Blackstone sect faction would have enough strength to defeat them. Of course, Sir Jean Tian's confidence was based on something, but he had overlooked a variable, and that variable was the Sacred Palace faction. If the Sacred Palace faction had not joined, then the 100 Spirits sect and the other great sects would indeed find it difficult to contend with the Blackstone sect. However, the Blackstone sect had an overwhelming advantage in the contest of candidates. But now that the Sacred Palace faction had also joined the alliance, this situation naturally changed. After all, although the Sacred Palace faction was small in number, they were all elites. It was a pity that Sir Jean Tian hadn't realized this yet. Following Sir Jean Tian's order to prepare for battle, the 500 disciples of the Blackstone sect were standing guard in a huge open space at the bottom of the valley outside the Blackstone sect faction's encampment. After so many days, the various great sects could be said to be well aware of the situation in the valley. Therefore, the disciples of the 9 great sects did not think of launching a sneak attack, because it was impossible. They surrounded the Blackstone sect faction from the front, and both sides faced each other. At the same time, Sir Jean Tian led the 7 candidates of the Blackstone sect faction to the front of the 2 factions, and his eyes immediately locked onto Brother Mu. Brother Mu was the leader of the 100 Spirits sect, and Sir Jean Tian naturally knew that Brother Mu was the strongest in the training ground, so he naturally paid more attention to him. As for the others, they were directly ignored by Sir Jean Tian. Brother Mu, it seems that you won't give up until you see the coffin. Some things are destined to not belong to you, so you can't force it. Otherwise, the consequences will be very serious. Sir Jean Tian, cut the crap. As the saying goes, those who see it have a share. Since we've all seen the Yin Wind Stone Culvert, let's split it. With Xiaochen by his side, Brother Mu was much more confident. He was indeed no match for Sir Jean Tian in a one-on-one fight, but with Xiaochen, Brother Mu was at least 80% confident that he could defeat Sir Jean Tian. After all, Brother Mu had personally experienced Xiaochen's strength. With confidence in his heart, he naturally spoke with a lot more confidence. However, Sir Jean Tian's face darkened when he heard Brother Mu's words, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1290. Big Brother Mu's attitude caused faint killing intent to arise in Sir Jean Tian's heart. The 2 of them weren't strangers, and they were the leaders of their respective sections. So, they'd come into contact with each other on many occasions. However, Big Brother Mu was absolutely courteous to Sir Jean Tian every time they met. But Big Brother Mu actually had the courage to speak to Sir Jean Tian in such a manner. At the same time that Sir Jean Tian was furious, he was slightly puzzled as well. Sir Jean Tian was very clearly aware of Big Brother Mu's ability, and it could be said that Sir Jean Tian was absolutely confident in his ability to defeat Big Brother Mu. Especially now that he'd broken through to the perfection stage of the Dao Emperor realm. Even though he'd just broken through, his combat strength had once more widened the gap between him and Big Brother Mu. But even then, Big Brother Mu actually dared to speak to him in such a manner. Sir Jean Tian laughed loudly and angrily. Ha ha! Good! 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 Big Brother Mu, looks like you really won't cry until you see the coffin. Very good. Since it's like that, then let me see exactly where your confidence comes from. Attack! Since it had already come to this, Sir Jean Tian couldn't be bothered to waste his breath on Big Brother Mu and the others. An alliance of the 9 sects? Do they think they can challenge the Blackstone sect with just this? Since they were able to become one of the 5 great sects of the Heavenly Music Sun Palace, the strength of the Blackstone sect isn't just for show. As soon as Sir Jean Tian finished speaking, the disciples of the Blackstone sect attacked at the same time, and they charged towards the members of the 9 great sections. none of the disciples of the Blackstone sect revealed cowardice when facing the 9 great sects at the same time. Perhaps this was the pride of the disciples of the Blackstone sect as one of the 5 great sections. In the heavenly Sun Palace, besides the main branch, the disciples of the Blackstone sect really didn't fear the members of the other sections. So, when facing a mere alliance of the 9 great sects now, the disciples of the Blackstone sect didn't reveal the slightest bit of fear. When the disciples of the Blackstone sect attacked, Big Brother Mu shouted coldly when he saw this. Attack! Since they'd already decided to become enemies with the Blackstone sect, then there was naturally no way out. Big Brother Mu wasn't afraid at all. As he shouted, the disciples of the 9 great sects charged out like wolves and tigers. You guys go too. Don't hold back. Everyone rushed out, but beside Xiaochen, the people from the sacred palace did not move. With the pride of Qianling and the others, they naturally would not listen to Brother Mu's orders. When it came to the pride in their hearts, the sacred palace faction was definitely not much less than the Blackstone sect faction. Therefore, after Brother Mu's voice fell, Qianling and the others had no intention of making a move at all. They waited until Xiaochen's voice fell before the Sacred Palace group rushed out. Compared to the disciples from the other factions, the Sacred Palace faction had the least number of disciples. However, as Qianling and the rest made their moves, the terrifying spiritual energy fluctuations instantly attracted the attention of many. These people are. Most people were unfamiliar with the Holy Palace faction, so they didn't know which faction Qianling and the others belonged to. However, from the spiritual energy fluctuations on their bodies, it was clear that each of them was more terrifying than the last. Not only were the disciples of the Blackstone sect shocked, but even the disciples of the other 8 sects of the Alliance were stunned. Wang Qikuan was in the crowd, and at this moment, there was a lingering fear. He couldn't help but recall what Xiaochen had said to him last night. Without the Sacred Palace faction, the Skymist sect and the 100 Spirits sect factions would only be like drawing water with a bamboo basket. Therefore, the Sacred Palace faction asking for 40% of the profits was not excessive. He originally thought that Xiaochen was asking for too much, but now it seemed that Xiaochen's words were not false at all. The Sacred Palace faction was simply a gathering camp of monsters. In particular, Qianling, Longqing, Qinyu, and Tianyu. Their power was no weaker than the prospective chosens of the Taiyang sect and Tianyin sect. It was hard to imagine how the Sacred Palace faction could have so many monsters. However, after a brief moment of shock, Wang Qikuan's heart was filled with a trace of ecstasy. With so many monsters in the Sacred Palace faction, there was no doubt that they would win this battle. Their hearts were wild with joy. However, on the other hand, the disciples of the Blackstone sect tightly frowned, including Shi Jintian. At that moment, a hint of seriousness flashed in their eyes as they looked at Qianling and the other 3. These 4 were very strong, but where did they come from? Shi Jintian didn't know. The strength displayed by the Sacred Palace faction had shocked everyone. At the same time, the battle had broken out. At this moment, only Shi Jintian, Brother Mu, and Xiaochen had yet to move. There was no time to deal with Qianling and the others for the time being. Shi Jintian looked at Brother Mu again, but when he saw Xiaochen beside Brother Mu, a trace of doubt flashed in his eyes. Xiaochen was completely unaffected, but now that Xiaochen was standing beside Brother Mu, it was obvious that the 2 were planning to join forces to deal with him. Brother Mu, your confidence comes from him? Shi Jintian had always been curious about where Brother Mu's confidence came from, but now it seemed like it should have come from Xiaochen. However, Xiaochen was just a nobody, so Shi Jintian didn't think that Xiaochen was very strong. Upon hearing Shi Jintian's words, Brother Mu smiled and said, "So what if there is?" Brother Mu had similarly witnessed the strength of Qianling and the others earlier, so he was even more confident in his heart. As a result, Brother Mu was even more calm and confident when facing Shi Jintian. Shi Jintian couldn't figure out why Brother Mu was even more confident than before, so he simply stopped thinking about it. His face sank as he shouted in a low voice. "Since it's like that, then let me personally shatter your confidence." As he spoke, Shi Jintian directly attacked. the aura of perfection of the Tao Emperor stage shot into the sky from his body. At the same time, the spatial ring in his hand flashed, and a saber appeared in his hand. When they saw Shi Jintian attack, Brother Mu and Xiao Chen naturally wouldn't be careless. Two shocking auras shot into the sky as well, and it was impossible to imagine that their battle last night was even more terrifying than it was. Even though Xiao Chen and Brother Mu had a great battle last night, to be honest, both of them had held back. Xiao Chen hadn't utilized the strength of his body, and Brother Mu hadn't gone all out as well. However, they were facing Shi Jintian today, so it was impossible for them to continue holding back. As soon as they attacked, Xiao Chen erupted with his tempered battle body, whereas Brother Mu's aura was even stronger than last night. Brother Mu was the first to speak with a smile when he sensed Xiao Chen's aura that was even stronger than last night. "Looks like you held back last night. Aren't you the same?" Xiao Chen smiled when he heard this. As soon as he finished speaking, the three of them moved in unison. Sword, saber, and spear collided fiercely. As soon as they attacked, Xiao Chen collided head-on with Shi Jintian. Shi Jintian's face sank when they collided head-on, and then he shouted in a low voice. "Who exactly are you? Begging for a monthly vote, begging for a recommendation." Chapter 1291. He didn't have the slightest impression of Xiao Chen. It was even to the extent that Shi Jintian didn't know that there was such a figure in the heavenly yin-yang sect. He originally thought that Xiao Chen was just an ordinary disciple. If that was the case, then it made sense that he didn't have any impression of him. However, after the collision with Xiao Chen, Shi Jintian's expression changed drastically when he sensed the powerful force coming from Xiao Chen's sword. The unfamiliar fellow before him was definitely not an ordinary disciple. His strength wasn't much weaker than Brother Mu's at all. In other words, even amongst the numerous candidates in the heavenly yin-yang sect, Xiao Chen's strength was sufficient to rank in the top 10. It was clearly impossible for Shi Jintian to not have any impression of someone whose strength was comparable to the top 10 candidates. That was why Shi Jintian questioned Xiao Chen. "Who exactly are you?" Xiao Chen didn't answer Shi Jintian's question. His expression was still as tranquil as before. The dustless sword in his hand moved to the side and stabbed toward Shi Jintian's chest in a tricky manner. The sudden attack directly interrupted Shi Jintian's thoughts. Shi Jintian had no choice but to toss aside his thoughts and raise his saber to block Xiao Chen's attack. In terms of strength, there was still a gap between Xiao Chen and Shi Jintian, and that gap came from the suppression of their cultivations. Since coming to the central world, Xiao Chen had gained a deeper understanding of a principle. It was impossible to surmount a realm of cultivation to battle the monstrous geniuses of the central world. That was something that even the chosen on the hallowed rankings couldn't accomplish. If one's cultivation was higher by a minor realm, then it would be an unreasonable suppression. There was nothing that could be done about it. As a result, the difference in the cultivation of the monstrous geniuses of the central world was a huge factor. Especially now that everyone had basically reached the Tao Emperor realm, every single breakthrough wasn't a simple matter. So a higher cultivation would be an unreasonable suppression. Xiao Chen was no match for Shi Jintian in a one-on-one battle. However, it was not just Xiao Chen alone. There was also Brother Mu by his side. Therefore, Shi Jintian was at a disadvantage when facing the two of them. At first, Shi Jintian was full of confidence. After all, he was no stranger to Brother Mu and had an absolute chance of winning. Even when Xiao Chen appeared in the end, Shi Jintian didn't take it seriously because he didn't think that Xiao Chen's strength would be very strong. However, the reality gave Shi Jintian a hard slap in the face. He thought that Xiao Chen would not be very strong, but his strength was not inferior to Brother Mu at all. This naturally disrupted Shi Jintian's entire plan. In addition, Chen Ling, Long Qing, and the others from the Sacred Palace were also extremely valiant. They beat up the prospective chosen disciples from the Blackstone sect to the point where they couldn't even put up a fight. Chen Ling, Long Qing, Chen Yu, and Tian Yu. The four of them were actually not much weaker than Xiao Chen. In terms of strength, they were enough to rank in the top 10 of the Taiyang sect. It could be said that the appearance of the Sacred Palace faction was a variable that Shi Jintian had not expected at all. If it weren't for the Sacred Palace faction, Shi Jintian and the Blackstone sect faction might not have lost this battle. However, with the addition of the Sacred Palace faction, it was like the last straw that broke the camel's back. It instantly tipped the scales of victory between the two sides. In the fierce battle, Shi Jintian's main target was Xiao Chen. It could be said that Shi Jintian hated Xiao Chen to the bone, even more than he hated Brother Mu. If it weren't for the appearance of Xiao Chen and the Sacred Palace faction, the situation wouldn't have turned out like this. Therefore, Shi Jintian's hatred for Xiao Chen and the Sacred Palace faction could be said to be the most intense. By focusing all his energy on dealing with Xiao Chen, the pressure on Brother Mu was naturally reduced by a lot. Xiao Chen was under a lot of pressure after being focused on by Shi Jintian. However, with the rapid self-healing ability of the tempered battle body, Xiao Chen was able to hold on. The injuries on his body were rapidly recovering. Shi Jintian was extremely shocked by Xiao Chen's terrifying self-healing ability. Was this kind of self-healing ability already considered terrifying? It wasn't even inferior to the Phoenix Huangyi clan. The bloodline power of the Phoenix Huangyi clan possessed extremely powerful self-healing abilities. Even completely awakened Phoenix Huangyi clan bloodline could be reborn from the ashes. It was precisely because of this terrifying self-healing ability that the Phoenix Huangyi clan could become one of the top 3 clans in the beast race. However, the self-healing ability displayed by Xiao Chen at this time, in Shi Jintian's opinion, was already not inferior to the Phoenix Huangyi clan. Under normal circumstances, Xiao Chen should have been seriously injured even if he didn't die. However, the fact was that Xiao Chen was not only not seriously injured, but there wasn't even a single wound on his body. Every time Shi Jintian injured Xiao Chen, the wound would miraculously self-heal in a short while. This shocked Shi Jintian and infuriated him. With such a terrifying self-healing ability, it was extremely difficult for Shi Jintian to seriously injure Xiao Chen. In addition, Brother Mu was constantly attacking him, so Shi Jintian had no choice but to be on guard. The battle soon reached its climax. One could imagine the pressure Shi Jintian was facing against Xiao Chen and Brother Mu. In particular, Xiao Chen's strange and terrifying self-healing ability made Shi Jintian helpless. Brother Mu, stop fooling around. End the battle as soon as possible. Xiao Chen had always been under great pressure from Shi Jintian, while Brother Mu took the opportunity to launch a sneak attack. At this time, Xiao Chen was also a little tired, so he said this. It was not that Xiao Chen couldn't hold on, but Xiao Chen didn't want to consume too much strength on Shi Jintian. After all, he still had to distribute the benefits. If he consumed too much strength, there might be a sudden change in the situation. Although he was with Brother Mu now, if his combat power dropped too much, Brother Mu would probably take care of him as well. Therefore, he had to be on guard against these things. Hearing Xiao Chen's words, Brother Mu was not stupid. He knew what Xiao Chen was thinking. He immediately nodded slightly and then shouted in a deep voice. Shi Jintian, you have lost this battle. Flaming Spear. As soon as he finished speaking, Brother Mu thrust out his spear. The long spear was surrounded by hot flames. This flaming spear could be said to be Brother Mu's strongest killing move. Naturally, its grade had reached the saint level. In the face of Brother Mu's killing move, Shi Jintian naturally didn't dare to be careless. He knew the power of Brother Mu's move. He immediately ignored Xiao Chen and turned to face Brother Mu's killing move head-on. However, just as Shi Jintian turned around and was about to deal with Brother Mu's killing move, Xiao Chen's faint voice sounded. Shi Jintian, have you forgotten that you still have me? Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendation. Chapter 1292. In the face of Brother Mu's flame spear, even Shi Jintian could not treat it casually. However, just as Shi Jintian turned his attention to Brother Mu, Xiao Chen's voice sounded. Hearing Xiao Chen's words, Shi Jintian's eyebrows twitched. Yes, he had forgotten about this. Xiao Chen was more difficult to deal with than Brother Mu. Without giving Shi Jintian too much time to think, Xiaochen also displayed his killer move as soon as he finished speaking. He slowly pointed his finger downwards, performing the sixth finger of the nine heavens sword finger, the fish intestine sword finger. A dark red light flashed. Just like the nine luo sword qi, Xiaochen had also cultivated the fish intestine sword finger to the perfection of martial arts over the years. However, compared to the nine luo sword qi, the fish intestine sword finger's lethality was definitely much greater. Facing the killing moves of Brother Mu and Xiaochen at the same time, Shi Jintian frowned. His instincts told him that Xiaochen's fish intestine sword finger was a deadly threat. In other words, Xiaochen's fish intestine sword finger was definitely more dangerous than Brother Mu's flame spear. Therefore, Shi Jintian had no choice but to turn around and deal with Xiaochen's fish intestine sword finger with all his strength. Since Xiaochen's fish intestine sword finger was obviously more powerful than Brother Mu's flame spear, he naturally had to choose to deal with Xiaochen's attack first. The fish intestine sword finger was able to deal with Xiaodio's fish intestine sword finger, but in terms of power, the fish intestine sword finger was definitely not as powerful as the flame spear. Unlike the flame spear's destructive aura, the fish intestine sword finger was silent, and only a finger-sized sword light flashed by. However, it was in this silence that the fish bowel sword finger inadvertently emitted an aura that made one's hair stand on end. The blood-red sword light flashed. In response, Shi Jintian did not hesitate. He directly punched out and shouted angrily, "Exploding stone!" Shi Jintian's fist seemed to have turned into a piece of black stone as it ruthlessly collided with the fish intestine sword finger. Shi Jintian's fist was also a saint-class martial skill. When it collided with the fish intestine sword finger, there was a loud explosion as the space started to collapse. He successfully blocked Xiaochen's fish intestine sword finger, but as expected, Brother Mu's flame spear also hit Shi Jintian. It was also at the last moment that Shi Jintian forcefully avoided his vitals, so his life was not in danger. However, after taking Brother Mu's killing move, Shi Jintian was also seriously injured. He spat out a mouthful of blood, and there was a fist-sized bloody hole in his abdomen. Blood kept gushing out. With one hand covering the bloody hole in his abdomen, Shi Jintian looked coldly at Brother Mu and then at Xiaochen. His eyes were burning with anger. Today, he was defeated by the joint forces of Xiaochen and Brother Mu, so it was easy to imagine the anger in Shi Jintian's heart. However, the current situation did not allow Shi Jintian to hesitate for too long. Now that he was seriously injured, he would definitely not be able to gain an advantage if the battle continued. Forcefully suppressing the anger in his heart, Shi Jintian coldly shouted, "Retreat." After being heavily injured, Shi Jintian finally gave the order to retreat. Hearing these words, although the disciples of the Blackstone sect were unwilling, they were able to clearly understand the situation. Without thinking too much, the disciples quickly retreated. The disciples of the Blackstone sect retreated, and the disciples of the other 9 sects did not pursue them. The greatest contribution to this great victory was, without a doubt, the Sacred Palace. After this battle, the people from the various factions did not dare to underestimate the Sacred Palace faction in the slightest. Although the Sacred Palace faction was few in number, each one of them was more abnormal than the other. They were practically monsters. Not only Xiaochen, but there was also Chenling, Longqing, Qinyu, Tianyu and the rest. Although their strength was not as good as the Sacred Palace faction, it was definitely not too far off. After the battle, it was time to split the spoils. Brother Mu took a deep look at Xiaochen. Just as Xiaochen had guessed, Brother Mu had thought of kicking the Sacred Palace faction away, but after personally witnessing the Sacred Palace faction's strength, Brother Mu dispelled this idea. First of all, judging from Xiaochen's current situation, it was obvious that he hadn't been affected much, and his combat strength was still there. Secondly, the combat strength of the other people from the Sacred Palace, especially Chenling and the others, made Brother Mu wary. If he kicked the Sacred Palace faction away at this time, it was very likely that both sides would suffer losses. Therefore, even if he was unwilling, Brother Mu could only accept the Sacred Palace faction taking 40% of the spoils. After taking a deep look at Xiaochen, Brother Mu withdrew his gaze. At this time, the disciples of the other factions also gathered around with joyful expressions. The battle was finally over, and it was finally time to split the spoils of victory. However, they clearly did not know that Brother Mu had no intention of sharing the Yin Stone Culvert with them from the beginning. Inadvertently, the 100 Spirits sect, Sky Mist sect, and Sacred Palace factions stood together with their backs against the entrance of the Yin Stone Culvert, blocking the disciples of the other 6 factions. Nothing out of the ordinary was discovered. However, just as the disciples of the 6 factions were secretly rejoicing, Brother Mu slowly opened his mouth to speak. "Everyone, I have a presumptuous request. This Yin Stone Culvert is a precious treasure, but there are too many monks and too little gruel. If so many of us were to split it, how many Yin stones would each person get? Therefore, I hope that my fellow brothers and sisters can do my brother Mu a favor and let me have this Yin Stone Culvert, junior brother Wang Qikuan, and brother Xiaochen. We will remember this moment and repay you in the future." Since the Blackstone sect faction had been defeated, Brother Mu naturally did not hide anything at this time. Instead, he very straightforwardly stated his request. Hearing Brother Mu's words, the originally joyful disciples of the 6 factions all changed their expressions. In the blink of an eye, they looked at Brother Mu with extreme anger, and some of them even shouted angrily. "Brother Mu, what do you mean? You want to monopolize the Yin Stone Culvert? Don't forget, without us, how could you have defeated the Blackstone sect faction?" Even an idiot knew what Brother Mu meant. He was getting rid of the donkey after it had outlived its usefulness. After defeating the Blackstone sect faction, Brother Mu, Wang Qikuan, and Xiaochen had joined forces to monopolize the Yin Stone Culvert. There was no need to hide it any longer. Therefore, Brother Mu coldly smiled when he heard the disciples' words. "That's right, we want to monopolize this Yin Stone Culvert. What do you think? Step forward if you don't agree." As he spoke, a soaring aura erupted from Brother Mu's body. His cold gaze swept across the disciples of the 6 factions, and there was a thick chill in his eyes. Men die in pursuit of wealth, and birds die in pursuit of food. In the face of such a precious treasure like the Yin Stone Culvert, Brother Mu's actions were understandable. Moreover, Xiaochen did not feel that there was any problem with driving the 6 factions away, because once the disciples of the 6 factions were allowed to participate in the distribution of the Yin Stone Culvert, it would affect the distribution of the Yin Stone Culvert. Regardless of how many Yin stones they distributed, it would ultimately affect the interests of the Sacred Palace faction. Giving an extra Yin stone to others meant that the Sacred Palace faction would have one less Yin stone. This was the most simple logic. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1293. Under Brother Mu's gaze, although the disciples of the 6 major factions were unwilling to admit defeat, they did not want to lose their temper. At the same time, more people inadvertently turned their eyes to Xiaochen and the Sacred Palace faction, who stood beside Brother Mu without saying a word. Apart from Brother Mu's 100 Spirits sect faction, the disciples of the 6 major factions were also afraid of Xiaochen's Sacred Palace faction. As for Wang Qikuan's Sky Mist sect faction, they were directly ignored by everyone. The Sky Mist sect faction was not strong and did not have much of a deterrent effect on everyone. On the contrary, Xiaochen's Sacred Palace faction had instilled a deep sense of fear in everyone after this battle. There was no need to mention Xiaochen, as he was someone who could fight Brother Mu. Other than that, the Holy Palace seemed to only have a dozen or so people, but every one of them was ridiculously strong. Although they were few in number, every one of them was an elite. How could such a faction not be feared? With the addition of the Sacred Palace faction, the disciples of the 6 major factions knew that they no longer had the chance to get a share of the Yin Stone Culvert. They had been used as a tool for nothing and gained nothing in the end, but who could they blame? They did not have the strength, so they could only be beaten. Although they were angry and unwilling, in the end, one of the leading disciples of one of the factions stood out and glared coldly at Brother Mu, Xiaochen, and Wang Qikuan. He then said fiercely, Brother Mu, Xiaochen, Wang Qikuan, I'll remember what happened today. Let's go. Even if the 6 major factions joined forces, they were no match for Brother Mu, Xiaochen, Wang Qikuan, and the others. Moreover, once they fought, the disciples of the 6 major factions would likely be directly crippled. In that case, just like the Li family faction, they would not be able to find Yin stones in the following period of time. This also meant that they could only miss this opportunity when the heavenly Yin Valley opened. There was still a lot of time. Less than a month had passed, and there were still 5 months before the half-year deadline. Rather than fight to the death here, it was better to preserve their strength and go elsewhere to find Yin stones. Following the departure of the first faction's disciple, the remaining 5 factions naturally took the initiative to withdraw as well. However, before they left, the eyes of the disciples from these factions burned with raging flames of fury. There were even some who did not forget to open their mouths and threaten the other factions. However, Brother Mu and Xiaochen did not care about their threat at all. Why should they care about the threat of a weakling? If they were no match today, would they be tomorrow? They paid no heed to the threats of the 6 great factions. As the 6 great factions left, only the 100 Spirits sect, Sky Mist sect, and Sacred Palace factions were left in the valley. Xiaochen and the others looked at each other, and then stepped into the culvert. As soon as they entered the culvert, waves of cold wind assaulted their faces. Moreover, compared to the outside world, the cold wind in the cave was clearly several times stronger. As expected of Feng Yang. Moreover, as they went deeper and deeper, Xiaochen and the others gradually saw a large number of Yin stones of various sizes. They were densely embedded on the walls of the cave. The cave wasn't very deep, and it was only a little over 100 meters deep. However, there were at least 700 Yin stones on the walls. So many Yin stones caused Xiaochen, Big Brother Mu, and Wang Qikuan to unconsciously reveal burning expressions. It was especially so for Xiaochen. With these Yin stones, he would definitely be able to break through to the advanced stage of the Tao Emperor realm. So long as he attained the advanced stage of the Tao Emperor realm, Xiaochen wouldn't have to fear anyone in Ilwind Gorge, including the so-called First Holy Son, Zhumujue. After a simple investigation, Brother Mu said, according to our agreement, our 100 Spirits sect and Sacred Palace will each get 40%, and the Sky Mist sect will get 20%. The thought of taking advantage of the Sacred Palace had already arisen in Brother Mu's mind. The Sacred Palace's strength made Brother Mu fearful, and he didn't dare to make the slightest move. Xiaochen nodded when he heard Brother Mu's words. Even though Wang Qikuan was slightly depressed in his heart, he could only nod in agreement. The Sky Mist faction was only given 20%. However, to Wang Qikuan, he had to accept this even if he did not want to. The reason was simple, the Sky Mist faction was the weakest. Even Wang Qikuan himself knew that if it weren't for the little bit of relationship he had with Brother Mu and Xiaochen would have kicked the Sky Mist sect away without any hesitation and let the 2 sects share the Yin stone culvert equally. Therefore, Wang Qikuan could only be content with the fact that he could still get 20% of the profits. As the saying goes, a greedy man is like a snake trying to swallow an elephant. There were times when you clearly couldn't take it all, but still insisted on taking it all. In the end, you would only end up stuffing yourself to death. The 3 of them had no objections to the distribution. Very soon, the disciples of the 3 factions entered the culvert and began to mine the Yin stones inside. I wonder what the Blackstone sect is thinking. They've occupied this Yin stone culvert for so many days, but they haven't mined it. Chinyu chuckled as he looked at the Yin stones on both sides of the culvert. Maybe they're overconfident. After all, they're one of the 5 great factions, and they think that no one will dare to steal from them. Chenling chuckled in response to Chinyu's teasing. The Blackstone sect was indeed overconfident, or perhaps Shi Jin Tian was too overconfident. They thought that no one would dare to touch the whiskers of the Blackstone sect. Little did they know that the Blackstone sect had suffered a double loss this time. The Yin stones in the entire culvert were divided into 3 sections. Among them, the Sacred Palace and the 100 Spirits sect were the largest, each taking up half of the space. the Sky Mist sect only took up 20% of the space. The mining work proceeded in an orderly manner. Due to the lack of people in the Sacred Palace faction, Wang Qikuan even took the initiative to ask the Sky Mist sect disciples to help the Sacred Palace faction mine the Yin Wind stones. Of course, Wang Qikuan did not dare to covet the Yin Wind stones of the Sacred Palace faction. He was only doing this as a gesture of goodwill. Now that he knew what kind of monstrous existence the Sacred Palace faction was, Wang Qikuan would be courting death if he still dared to have any ideas about the Sacred Palace faction. Xiaochen did not refuse Wang Qikuan's goodwill. After all, the Sacred Palace faction really did not have enough people. Xiaochen and a dozen others wanted to mine the Yin Wind stones all by themselves. It was indeed a tedious and laborious task. Since Wang Qikuan had taken the initiative to help, Xiaochen naturally would not refuse. With the help of Wang Qikuan's Sky Mist sect faction, the Yin Wind stones that belonged to the Sacred Palace faction were finally mined a day later. There were truly over 300 Yin Wind stones. Xiaochen, Chenling, and the rest could not help but smile in the face of such a large number of Yin Wind stones. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1294. Xiaochen did not choose to refine the Yin Wind stone in the valley because he was worried that the disciples of the other sects would come. After all, the disciples of the Blackstone sect and the other 6 sects had left. They would probably spread the news of the existence of the Yin Wind stone culvert. When that happened, the disciples of the other sects would probably come. Brother Mu and Wang Qikuan shared the same thoughts as Xiaochen. Therefore, the two of them also collected the Yin Wind stones but did not refine them immediately. The Blackstone sect had suffered a double loss because of their overconfidence. Xiaochen and the other two naturally would not make the same mistake again. After collecting all the Yin Wind stones in the Yin Wind stone culvert, Xiaochen prepared to leave the valley. Outside the Yin Wind stone culvert, Xiaochen looked at Brother Mu and Wang Qikuan with a smile on his face. Since this matter is over, we'll part ways here. Haha, all right. Brother Xiao, please. After we leave the Heavenly Yin Valley, I will personally treat Brother Xiao and everyone from the Sacred Palace to a drink. Brother Mu laughed heartily. Compared to Brother Mu, Wang Qikuan's attitude towards Xiaochen was very respectful. Moreover, it seemed like he had already made up his mind to cling onto the Sacred Palace faction's thighs in the future. Therefore, Wang Qikuan bowed respectfully after Brother Mu's words, completely treating himself as Xiaochen's subordinate. Senior Brother Xiaochen, if you need our Heavenly Mist sect's help in the future, you can send someone to inform me. I dare not disobey. Good. Come find me in my cave when the Heavenly Yin Valley closes. Xiaochen understood Wang Qikuan's intentions and gently patted him on the shoulder. A strange look flashed across Brother Mu's eyes when he saw the two of them acting like this, but he did not say anything. After a simple farewell, Xiaochen did not linger and left with the Sacred Palace group. Wang Qikuan and Brother Mu sent them off with their eyes. When the Sacred Palace group had completely disappeared from sight, Brother Mu exhaled and looked at Wang Qikuan. Qikuan, have you really made up your mind? Brother Mu was clearly asking if Wang Qikuan had really decided to cling onto Xiaochen's thighs. One had to know that some of the weaker factions in the Heavenly Yin Solar sect would choose to attach themselves to the stronger factions. This was similar to how the various quasi-saint sects attached themselves to the Heavenly Yin Solar sect, willingly becoming the Heavenly Yin Solar sect's claws and hounds. However, the Heavenly Yin Wind Solar sect would not be able to escape if anything happened to the Sacred Palace faction. If anything happened to the Sacred Palace faction, the Heavenly Yin Solar sect would not be able to escape from the Heavenly Yin sect. In Brother Mu's view, the strength displayed by the Sacred Palace was indeed shocking, but their foundation was still shallow after all. Choosing to rely on them now wasn't a wise choice. Hearing Brother Mu's words, Wang Qikuan smiled faintly and said, providing help in a time of need is far better than adding flowers to a brocade. Moreover, Brother Mu should be clear about the situation of our Sky Mist sect. Who in the entire Sky Mist sect would be willing to interfere in this matter? I know what Brother Mu is worried about, but I'm well aware of Brother Xiao Chen's character. If I choose to rely on the Sacred Palace faction at a time like this, Brother Xiao Chen won't just sit back and do nothing when the time comes. He's a loyal and righteous person. What's more, the Sacred Palace faction has great potential. Wang Qikuan saw things very clearly. Not only did he see the potential of the Holy Palace, but he also saw through Xiao Chen's character. He also knew that providing help in a time of need was far better than adding flowers to a brocade. What the Sacred Palace faction could gain now was far more than what they could gain in the future. If they chose to rely on the Sacred Palace faction after its rise, the ruins would be completely different. This was just like how in a dynasty, the emperor's officials held a much higher position in his heart than the ordinary officials. Wang Qikuan cupped his hands towards Brother Mu and said, "Brother Mu, I'll also take my leave." Sigh, all right. Brother Mu nodded and the two also took their leave. Unaware of the conversation between Brother Mu and Wang Qikuan, Xiao Chen and the others were already far away from the Yin Wind Stone Culvert a day later. They found a safe place and stopped to cultivate. Xiao Chen also planned to stay here for a while to refine the Yin Wind Stones on him first. There were more than 300 Yin Wind Stones. For the dozen or so people from the Sacred Palace, each of them would receive a lot. It could be said that the harvest this time was quite bountiful. After evenly distributing the Yin Wind Stones on him, Xiao Chen divided everyone into two groups to refine the Yin Wind Stones. This was the Yin Wind Valley after all, so they couldn't be careless. So, when one group was refining the Yin Wind Stones, another group had to be responsible for guarding them. Otherwise, it would be very dangerous if the Sacred Palace faction wasn't on guard at all once people from other factions arrived. No one had any objections to Xiao Chen's actions, and they quickly returned to cultivating according to Xiao Chen's instructions. Now that they had sufficient Yin Wind Stones, they naturally wouldn't waste any time. In the following period of time, everyone was refining the Yin Wind Stones with all their might. During this period of time, Qin Shuru and the other two successfully broke through to the initial Dao Emperor realm with the help of the Yin Wind Stones. 5 days passed in a row, and Xiao Chen was finally about to break through. The aura on his body started to show signs of rebellion, and this was a sign that he was about to break through. Along with Xiao Chen's breakthrough, Chen Ling and the others in the surroundings were jolted awake, and a wisp of a smile flashed through their eyes as they looked at Xiao Chen. Xiao Chen was finally about to break through. Once he broke through to perfection in the Dao Emperor realm, Xiao Chen would possess the qualifications to ascend the hallowed rankings. At the same time, Bai Qiuran's matter wouldn't be a cause for fear. Everyone was happy for Xiao Chen's breakthrough. At this moment, Xiao Chen was ceaselessly attacking the barrier to perfection in the Dao Emperor realm. Xiao Chen had experienced such breakthroughs countless times, so even though the barrier to perfection in the Dao Emperor realm was extraordinarily firm, Xiao Chen wasn't anxious at all, and he just attacked it step by step without end. A day passed, and the fluctuations of Xiao Chen's spirit energy grew more and more chaotic. However, right at this moment, a muffled bang resounded from within Xiao Chen's body, and the barrier to perfection in the Dao Emperor realm had finally been successfully broken through. Once the barrier was broken through, Xiao Chen's cultivation suddenly rose explosively, and it instantly rose to perfection in the Dao Emperor realm. At the same time, Xiao Chen immediately withdrew a Yin Wind Stone and started to refine and absorb it. The spirit energy in the surroundings was ceaselessly sucked into Xiao Chen's body like a whale, and the energy within the Yin Wind Stone swiftly entered Xiao Chen's limbs and meridians as well, and it ceaselessly condensed the spirit energy that was still slightly unstable after breaking through. For the sake of breaking through from the perfection stage of the Dao Emperor realm to the advanced stage of the Dao Emperor realm, Xiao Chen had spent an entire few years. Now that he'd broken through in one go, Xiao Chen's combat strength had naturally undergone a tremendous change. Begging to be collected, begging to be recommended. Chapter 1295. After successfully breaking through, Xiao Chen finished refining all the Yin Wind Stones in his possession a day later. He slowly opened his eyes while a wisp of a faint smile appeared on the corners of his mouth. Perfection of the Dao Emperor realm. He finally had the qualifications to challenge the hallowed rankings. However, it was still a little too early to do so, and he still needed some time to stabilize his cultivation. After all, even though Xiao Chen's cultivation was at the same level as the Chosen on the hallowed rankings, there was still a gap between them. No matter what, Xiao Chen had just broken through to perfection of the Tao Emperor realm. On the other hand, the Chosen on the hallowed rankings had been at perfection of the Tao Emperor realm for a few years at the very least. His cultivation hadn't stabilized yet, so it wasn't the time to challenge the hallowed rankings for now. However, since he'd successfully broken through to perfection of the Tao Emperor realm, then the following matters would be much simpler. Moreover, after this breakthrough, even if Xiao Chen were to face Zhu Mujue, who was known as the first candidate, he would absolutely not be afraid of him. Even if he were to encounter Bai Qiran, he wouldn't dare to say that he could defeat her, but at least he would be able to put up a fight. Moreover, if Xiao Chen wanted to leave, Bai Qiran wouldn't be able to stop him. The breakthrough in his cultivation allowed Xiao Chen to feel much more confident. Right when Xiao Chen slowly opened his eyes, the four women arrived before Xiao Chen and passed the remaining Yin Wind stones to Xiao Chen. Their intentions were very clear. They hoped that Xiao Chen would use these Yin Wind stones to stabilize his cultivation as soon as possible. Xiao Chen smiled at the four women's kindness. "You can keep it for yourselves. Now that I want to stabilize my cultivation base, it's no longer enough to rely on the Yin Wind stone. I need time to settle down." Xiao Chen was right. Xiao Chen had already stabilized the areas that needed to be stabilized. As for the rest, he could only rely on time to slowly stabilize them. Moreover, after his cultivation had broken through, Xiao Chen felt that he had too few martial skills, especially sacred-level martial skills. He thought that after the Heavenly Yin Valley was over, he should go to the Martial Skills Hall of the Heavenly Yin Taiyang sect to take a look. After all, the number of saint-level martial arts techniques collected by a Supreme Saint sect should not be too small. Moreover, the saint-level martial arts techniques that Xiao Chen had mastered, whether it was the Jiuluo sword Qi or the fish intestine sword finger, were only low-level saint-level martial arts techniques. If he could cultivate a mid-level saint-level martial arts technique, it would be obvious that Xiao Chen's combat strength would increase. He did not accept the Yin Wind stones from the four women. First of all, the Yin Wind stones were extremely useful to the four women. Everyone had to improve after entering the Heavenly Yin Valley. Moreover, compared to him, the cultivation of the four women was indeed a little lower, especially Qin Shuru, 100 Flower Fairy, and Gu Ling Yao. Under Xiao Chen's persuasion, the four women finally put away their respective Yin Wind stones. Because the others had not finished cultivating, Xiao Chen was basically responsible for guarding them for the rest of the time. He had finished refining all his Yin Wind stones, and his cultivation had broken through to the perfection stage of the Tao Emperor realm. It was indeed difficult for him to make any progress in a short period of time. Thus, Xiao Chen naturally took the initiative to play the role of guard. With Xiao Chen's protection, the others were naturally much more at ease when they cultivated. Not to mention anything else, Yun Kunyo and Bai Qiran, the two chosen on the hallowed rankings, hadn't entered the Heavenly Yin Valley this time. Without the two of them, Xiao Chen could be considered as one of the top figures in the entire Heavenly Yin Valley. Even if he encountered Zhu Mujue, Xiao Chen could still stand against him. Moreover, his chances of victory were very high. So, with Xiao Chen by their side, not to mention anything else, they should be able to do whatever they wanted in the Heavenly Yin Valley. Even if they were suppressed by numbers and couldn't defeat them, they were completely capable of retreating calmly. They didn't have to worry about their safety anymore. Everyone cultivated bitterly within the quiet forest. A few more days passed, and they'd finished refining all the Yin Wind stones they'd been allocated. At this point, they'd finished refining all the Yin Wind stones they'd obtained from the culvert. But regretfully, Chen Ling, Long Qing, Qin Yu, and Tian Yu hadn't been able to break through, and they were still stuck at the perfection stage of the Tao Emperor realm. The four of them weren't like Xiao Chen who'd broken through to the perfection stage of the Tao Emperor realm in one go. However, with their current cultivations, it probably wouldn't be difficult for them to break through if they gathered more Yin Wind stones. Besides the four of them, everyone else had obtained some gains this time. Moreover, along with their breakthroughs, the sacred palace's strength had naturally been strengthened once more, and it couldn't be compared to before at all. They had been here for almost half a month, and it was time for them to leave. Therefore, after everyone had finished cultivating, they rested for only a day before Xiao Chen led them out of the forest and continued their journey to the depths of the heavenly Yin Valley. The closer they got to the depths, the more Yin Wind stones there were. In the next few days, Xiao Chen's group naturally obtained quite a few more Yin Wind stones, and Xiao Chen didn't take the majority of the Yin Wind stones. Instead, he distributed them equally, so everyone obtained the same amount of Yin Wind stones. They didn't encounter any danger all along the way. Even though they did encounter some disciples from the other sects, no battles broke out between them. Of course, because of their strength, the sacred palace wasn't afraid of fighting with any other sections. Just Xiao Chen alone was sufficient to deter the other sections. A few days passed peacefully. At this moment, Xiao Chen's group had completely entered the depths of the heavenly Yin Valley's estate. The amount of Yin Wind stones here had indeed increased by quite a bit. On this day, Xiao Chen's group discovered that there were actually a few dozen Yin Wind stones of various sizes at the bottom of a huge ancient tree. This ancient tree was extremely huge, but it had branches and no leaves. The entire tree trunk and branches were jet black in color, as if they were made of steel. It was a very strange tree. Perhaps this was related to the environment of the heavenly Yin Valley. Just as Xiao Chen's group was about to collect the Yin Wind stones, a cold shout suddenly sounded. "Put them down if you don't want to die." Following this cold shout, a group of over 100 people flew over from afar and quickly landed in front of Xiao Chen's group. The disciples of the main branch. When Xiao Chen saw the group of more than 100 people, he immediately recognized that they were disciples of the main branch. At the same time, the disciples of the main branch also recognized Xiao Chen and the others. The leader of the group, a prospective chosen, sneered and said, "Don't worry, we're all disciples of the main branch. So it's the Sacred Palace faction. I didn't expect you to dare to come so deep into this place. Good, looks like it's really a case of searching high and low only to find it by chance. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." Chapter 1296. He hadn't expected to encounter someone from the Sacred Palace here. The leading candidate was overjoyed because this was definitely a good opportunity to claim credit. If he could take down Xiao Chen here, wouldn't his senior brother Bai Qiuran give him a great credit? The main branch was the strongest branch in the Heavenly Yin Sun sect, and there was no dispute about this. However, the main branch was currently divided into 3 different factions. One faction supported Bai Qiuran's faction, one faction supported Holy Maiden Yun Kunyo's faction, and the last faction was neutral. For example, the disciples led by Zhu Mujue belonged to the neutral faction. The 2 chosen on the hallowed rankings had divided the main branch into 3 factions, and all the disciples had chosen to join one of the factions. The group of main branch disciples that Xiao Chen and the others had encountered clearly belonged to Bai Qiuran's faction. A wisp of undisguised coldness flickered in Xiao Chen's eyes, but he didn't care at all when he heard the disciples' words. He said indifferently, "What can you do with just the few of you?" Xiao Chen didn't take these disciples seriously at all. Not to mention now, even if he hadn't broken through to the perfection of the Tao Emperor realm, Xiao Chen wouldn't fear them. Not to mention that Xiao Chen's cultivation had already broken through to the perfection of the Tao Emperor realm, so it was even more impossible for him to take them seriously. Not to mention them, even if Zhu Mujue came, Xiao Chen wouldn't fear him at all. Unless Zhu Mujue came with a few hundred main branch disciples and used numbers to suppress the Sacred Palace's faction. Only then would Xiao Chen be able to retreat in the face of difficulties. The leading candidate's face sank when he saw that Xiao Chen wasn't afraid at all, and he said coldly, "You're still so stubborn even when you're about to die. You're simply courting death. Go, take them down." He hadn't seen the strength of the Sacred Palace's faction, so he clearly didn't know how terrifying the Sacred Palace's faction was. As soon as he spoke, the main branch disciples behind him swarmed over. Xiao Chen smiled. Big brother, second sister, senior brother Chen, I'll leave these ants to you. It's just a small matter, Long Qing said with a smile. Xiao Chen did not plan to participate in this battle. Firstly, these guys were not a threat at all. Secondly, Xiao Chen did not want to expose his breakthrough. He knew that the one who really wanted to kill him was Bai Qiuran's younger brother, Bai Qiuyue. Moreover, to Xiao Chen, he could let the others go. After all, they were all disciples of the same sect. However, Xiao Chen had to kill Bai Qiuyue because he was Bai Qiuran's younger brother. He deserved to die. Previously, Wang Qikuan had already told him some information about Bai Qiuyue. He knew that she was known as the White Snake. She was shrewd, meticulous, and ruthless. She was extremely good at scheming and plotting. For such a person, Xiao Chen naturally hit his cultivation level in order to bait him. As long as Bai Qiuyue dared to show himself, Xiao Chen would kill him in one fell swoop. Presently, besides the members of the Sacred Palace, no one else knew that Xiao Chen had broken through to perfection of the Tao Emperor realm. At that time, he would definitely be able to give Bai Qiuyue a pleasant surprise. Xiao Chen had no intention to attack at all while he thought like this in his heart. On the other hand, Chen Ling and the others didn't show the slightest fear when facing the attacks of over 100 disciples from the main branch. Everyone attacked, and both sides were locked in an intense battle. On the other hand, Xiao Chen minded his own business and started to gather the Yin Wind stones in the surroundings unhurriedly. When he saw that Xiao Chen had no intention to attack at all, the leader of the main branch immediately shouted in a low voice. "Xiao Chen, what's wrong? Are you a coward? You don't even have the courage to fight? Even ants dare to act so ferociously. Is there any need for me to personally deal with you? Die!" As soon as the leader finished speaking, Long Qing sent a disciple flying with a punch, and then his figure flashed and appeared in front of that disciple before he sneered. This group of disciples from the main branch clearly wasn't strong. Besides the leader of the main branch who possessed some strength, the others weren't a match for the members of the Sacred Palace at all. Most of them were still at the Tao Emperor realm. Besides the chosen on the hallowed rankings, the disciples of the entire heavenly Yin-Yang sect were divided into the following categories: prospective chosen, personal disciples, core disciples, and ordinary disciples. Amongst them, the cultivations of quasi-saints were usually at the advanced stage of the Tao Emperor realm or above. On the other hand, personal disciples ranged from the advanced stage of the Tao Emperor realm to the Tao Emperor realm. As for core disciples, practically all of them possessed cultivations at the Tao Emperor realm while ordinary disciples were below the Tao Emperor realm. So, there weren't many disciples at the Tao Emperor realm in the heavenly Yin-Yang sect, but there were definitely quite a few as well. After all, the numbers were there for all to see. The entire heavenly Yin-Yang sect definitely had 1,000,000 disciples. As for the 100+ disciples from the main branch, besides the prospective chosen, there were merely 7 or 8 personal disciples, and practically all the others were core disciples. It was precisely because of this that even though their group seemed to be huge, they were basically no threat to the members of the Sacred Palace. As soon as the battle erupted, the situation became one-sided. Numerous disciples from the main branch were heavily injured by the members of the Sacred Palace, and they couldn't get up from the ground. The prospective chosen was completely dazed as he gazed at the situation before him that was completely different from what he'd imagined. How is this possible? The Sacred Palace only has a little over a dozen people, so where did they get such formidable combat strength from? He was shocked in his heart. Moreover, through the observation of the prospective chosen, he noticed to his surprise that not a single person from the Sacred Palace was below the Tao Emperor realm. It was even to the extent that Guduoya, Ouyang Roshue, and Huangfu Ao's cultivations were at the entry level of the Tao Emperor realm. Exactly what kind of monstrous genius was this? The prospective chosen was completely dazed, and his heart was in a mess. Long Qing smiled coldly as he similarly sensed the prospective chosen's absent-mindedness. "You dare to get distracted while fighting me? You're courting death." As he spoke, Long Qing suddenly punched out, and the roar of a dragon resounded. Only when he sensed the lethal threat from Long Qing's fist did the prospective chosen instantly return to his senses. He wanted to block it at the first possible moment, but he'd forgotten everything. Long Qing easily blasted his defenses apart, and then his fist struck his chest. A large mouthful of blood sprayed from his mouth, and the robust prospective chosen was immediately blasted away before crashing heavily to the ground. He was clearly heavily injured and didn't continue to attack. Long Qing stood on the spot and looked at the prospective chosen from afar with a disdainful expression. Even an ant like you dares to act so fiercely and spout such nonsense. Ha! As soon as he finished speaking, Long Qing didn't wait for the prospective chosen to reply. He directly turned around and walked towards Xiao Chen without even sparing a glance at the latter. Begging for your collection, begging for your monthly votes, begging for your recommendation. Chapter 1297. In this battle, the Sacred Palace faction had easily defeated the 100+ disciples of the main faction. After being heavily injured by Long Qing's punch, the leading candidate stared blankly. Even now, he still couldn't believe that the Sacred Palace faction was so strong. Although they were few in number, each one of them possessed heaven-defying strength. He had completely underestimated the Sacred Palace faction and had paid a heavy price for it. The Sacred Palace faction had severely injured his team of over 100 people. Although not a single one of them had been killed, every single one of them had sustained serious injuries. With such serious injuries, even with the help of medicinal pills, it would take at least 1 to 2 months for them to fully recover. As a result, their trip to the heavenly Yin Valley was cut off. This was because everyone in this group would have to find a place to recuperate for the rest of their time. At the same time, Xiao Chen had also finished collecting the dozens of Yin Wind stones under the ancient tree. However, when Long Qing and the others came to Xiao Chen's side, Xiao Chen put away the last Yin Wind stone into his storage ring and smiled at everyone. Not bad. Everyone smiled when they heard Xiao Chen's words. After chatting with the crowd for a while, Xiao Chen turned his head to look at the hundreds of main bloodline disciples who were groaning on the ground. They had all been seriously injured. A hint of a smile flashed in Xiao Chen's eyes. He walked up to the leading candidate and looked down at him from above. Facing Xiao Chen, the prospective Holy Son felt a burning pain in his chest, which was caused by Long Qing's punch. However, at this time, the prospective Holy Son still held on and snorted coldly. Xiao Chen, don't be too smug. You won't have a good ending after offending senior brother Bai Qiuran. Someone will come to deal with you soon. Oh? Is it Bai Qiuyue or Zhu Mujue? Xiao Chen chuckled nonchalantly. He wasn't afraid of Bai Qiuyue and the others. On the contrary, even if Bai Qiuyue didn't come, Xiao Chen would take the initiative to find him. With a smile, Xiao Chen paused for a moment before continuing, "Tell Bai Qiuyue that I'll be waiting for him." Xiao Chen didn't kill the candidate. Although he was Bai Qiuran's lackey, he had no interest in killing him. Everything had been caused by Bai Qiuran, so as long as he dealt with him, nothing else would exist. Moreover, would the main branch disciples who once followed Bai Qiuran still follow him? After asking the candidate to pass on a message to Bai Qiuyue, Xiao Chen led the Sacred Palace group away and left at a leisurely pace. Watching the departing figures of Xiao Chen and the others, a look of confusion appeared on the prospective chosen one's face. The faction of the Sacred Palace was too mysterious, especially since each of them could be said to have unique skills. Did such a faction really come from the barren land of the North Star Realm? Bewilderment flashed across his heart. However, this tormenting bewilderment was quickly replaced by confidence. He had indeed underestimated the Sacred Palace faction's strength, but so what? No matter how strong the Sacred Palace faction was, could they be stronger than the main branch? Moreover, Bai Qiuyue had even persuaded Zhu Mujue to deal with Xiao Chen. With Zhu Mujue's strength and Bai Qiuyue's plan, they would definitely be able to take down the Sacred Palace faction. He had absolute confidence in the main branch. After all, it was the most powerful faction in the Heavenly Yin Sun sect. How could a foreign faction like the Sacred Palace contend against it? It was as if he could already see the scene of Xiao Chen being killed by Bai Qiuyue. Not long after Xiao Chen and the others from the sacred palace left, another group of disciples from the main branch arrived. However, after seeing that all of them had been seriously injured, the group of disciples immediately sent the news to Bai Qiuyue. One had to admit that the main branch did indeed have the capital to be arrogant, which was vividly reflected in the number of people they had. The various factions had sent disciples into the heavenly Yin Valley, but the main branch had the most people, numbering over 1,000. With such a large number of people, even if the first battalion disciples who followed Yin Kunya were excluded, Bai Qiuyue still had nearly 700 disciples under her. Of course, this included the neutral faction like Zhu Mujue. However, Zhu Mujue and the other neutral faction disciples also obeyed Bai Qiuyue's orders. This was something Zhu Mujue himself had agreed to because he owed Bai Qiuyue a favor. After receiving the news, Bai Qiuyue soon arrived with a group of more than 400 main branch disciples. Among them, Zhu Mujue naturally followed by Bai Qiuyue's side. When Bai Qiuyue arrived, she approached the candidate saint with a warm smile on her face as she faced the group of heavily injured disciples from the main faction. "Junior brother Chen, how are your injuries? Are they serious? I have a saint-grade pill here. Junior brother, please take it." She didn't question or blame him at all. On the contrary, Bai Qiuyue revealed a wisp of deep concern. Moreover, she even took out a divine-grade medicinal pill and fed it to this prospective holy son to heal his injuries. The candidate was touched by Bai Qiuyue's concern, but he didn't accept the medicinal pill. Instead, he said with a look of self-blame, "Your junior brother is incompetent. Please punish me, senior brother." It had to be said that Bai Qiuyue really had a way of winning people's hearts. With his actions, the 100 or so disciples who had been seriously injured by the Sacred Palace faction were all moved. At the same time, their hatred for the Sacred Palace faction surged in their hearts. He was completely different from her brother, Bai Qiuran. After pacifying him and personally feeding him a pill, Bai Qiuyue asked about the Holy Palace's faction. "Senior brother, we've underestimated the Sacred Palace's forces. The Sacred Palace's forces are very strong. Even though there's only a little over 10 of them, not a single one of them is below the Dao Emperor realm." The prospective holy son told Bai Qiuyue everything that had happened, and he even sighed in the end. "Ah, how is Xiao Chen's cultivation?" Bai Qiuyue wasn't interested in the others, but she attached great importance to Xiao Chen. "Xiao Chen didn't make a move," the candidate replied truthfully. Xiao Chen hadn't made a move, but according to everyone's guess, Xiao Chen shouldn't have broken through. After all, only a short while had passed, so how could Xiao Chen have broken through so quickly? Of course, Bai Qiuyue definitely hadn't imagined that Xiao Chen and the others had found a stone culvert and relied on it to successfully break through to the perfection of the Dao Emperor stage. Bai Qiuyue's expression didn't change at all because of the Sacred Palace's strength. She revealed a faint smile and said, "It's fine. No matter how strong they are, there are only a dozen of them. My main bloodline has 100 people. Could it be that we can't take down a few clowns like them? Begging to be collected, begging to be recommended." Chapter 1298. As she spoke, killing intent flashed through Bai Qiuyue's eyes. She gently patted the chosen holy son's shoulder and instructed him to pay attention to his rest. In the end, Bai Qiuyue even specially left behind 20 disciples from the main branch to take care of and protect them. After all, over 100 people were already heavily injured. Toward Bai Qiuyue's actions, the 100 over disciples were naturally moved to tears, and Bai Qiuyue responded to them with a smile. One had to admit that Bai Qiuyue was much better than Bai Qiuran. If it weren't for Bai Qiuran's extraordinary talent that made her a chosen on the saint ranking, Bai Qiuyue would have completely crushed her. Even so, Bai Qiuran's faction was basically developed by Bai Qiuyue and had nothing to do with Bai Qiuran. Most of the time, Bai Qiuran was just a symbol of her status as a chosen on the saint ranking. After settling the matter here, Bai Qiuyue stood up. He paused for a moment when he arrived beside Zhu Mujue and patted him on the shoulder with a smile. "Senior brother Zhu, I'll be counting on you this time. Don't worry, I won't fail as long as Lian Yao doesn't stop me. However, once this matter is over, we'll write off our previous grudge." Zhu Mujue nonchalantly said. "Don't worry. Although I, your junior, am not some indomitable hero, I can still keep my word." Hearing that, Bai Qiuyue lightly smiled and said. After saying that, Bai Qiuyue and Zhu Mujue brushed past each other and gazed into the distance. "Xiaochen, the number of people is too small. This will always be the weakness of your sacred palace. Even if everyone in your sacred palace has extraordinary battle prowess, there are still only a dozen or so people." Bai Qiuyue had long seen through the sacred palace faction's weakness, which was their foundation in numbers. Moreover, Bai Qiuyue clearly understood the sacred palace faction better than the others. After all, Bai Qiuran had interacted with Chen Ling, Long Qing and Qin Yu before and knew that the three of them weren't ordinary individuals. Bai Qiuyue naturally knew this as well. Therefore, Bai Qiuyue didn't find it strange at all that the Sacred Palace faction could completely crush the 100 or so main faction disciples. In his opinion, this was a very normal thing. But so what? Bai Qiuyue's target was only Xiaochen. As long as she could delay the rest of the Sacred Palace faction, and then let Zhu Mujue take action, what could the Sacred Palace faction do? The only problem now was how to seal off the Sacred Palace faction's escape route. After all, the Sacred Palace faction was very small, with only a dozen or so people. There were advantages and disadvantages to having a small number of people. When encountering a large group, such as the hundreds of people from the main bloodline, it was naturally impossible to face them head-on. This was a disadvantage. On the other hand, the advantage was that it was easy to shift. With so few people, if they couldn't defeat the enemy, they could just turn around and leave. They could just hide in a remote forest. At that time, it wouldn't be easy for Bai Qiuyue to find Xiaochen and the others. If they couldn't win, they could run. This was the current advantage of the Sacred Palace faction. In addition, each member of the Sacred Palace faction had extraordinary combat strength, which made it even more difficult to catch them. Therefore, the most important problem for Bai Qiuyue now was how to stop Xiaochen and the others from escaping, how to seal off their escape route, and then catch them like a turtle in a jar. With that thought in mind, Bai Qiuyue found a quiet place and took out a map from her storage ring. The map wasn't just some random place, it was a map of the heavenly Yin Valley. Foundations were often revealed at times like this. The main bloodline was very powerful, and under the efforts of generations of disciples, the main bloodline had long explored the entire heavenly Yin Valley. Therefore, it wasn't surprising that Bai Qiuyue had a map of the heavenly Yin Valley. Bai Qiuyue's eyes were fixed on the map, and in the end, her gaze locked onto a long and narrow valley not far from here. The valley didn't have a name, but from the map, it was very narrow, with towering mountain ranges on both sides. As long as they enter the valley, it would be easy to seal it off. After staring at the valley for a long while, Bai Qiuyue came up with a plan in her heart. Her eyes were full of confidence as she fixed her gaze on the valley. Bai Qiuyue smiled faintly. "Xiaochen, this will be your burial ground." The valley was very suitable for encirclement. As long as they forced Xiaochen and the others into the valley, Bai Qiuyue's main bloodline disciples would block the two exits and occupy the two mountain peaks on both sides. At that time, Xiaochen and the others would be like turtles in a jar. At that time, the disciples of the main branch would hold back the people of the Sacred Palace while Zhu Mujue would kill Xiaochen. Then, everything would be a success. Bai Qiuyue had nearly 500 disciples under her command, including nearly 20 chosen. Bai Qiuyue didn't believe that such a force wouldn't be enough to pin down the Sacred Palace disciples. Thinking of this, Bai Qiuyue immediately called over the dozen chosen and ordered them to immediately begin searching for the Sacred Palace disciples. Once they found them, there was no need to continue attacking. Instead, they would find a way to drive them into the valley Bai Qiuyue had chosen. The dozen chosen nodded in response when they heard Bai Qiuyue's order. After that, the nearly 500 disciples under Bai Qiuyue's command split into over a dozen teams and began to encircle and annihilate the Sacred Palace disciples. Xiaochen was unaware of Bai Qiuyue's plan, and he didn't have a map of the heavenly Yin Valley. After Xiaochen and the others left, Xiaochen was also thinking about how to deal with Bai Qiuyue. It was definitely impossible to fight them head-on because the difference in numbers was too great. Even if the Sacred Palace disciples possessed great combat strength, it was impossible for a dozen or so of them to kill a few hundred disciples from the main bloodline. Moreover, the main bloodline disciples weren't all good-for-nothings. The chosen weren't weak at all. Even if they might not be a match for the Sacred Palace disciples in a one-on-one battle, what if it was 2-on-1 or 3-on-1? The only advantage Xiaochen had right now was that Bai Qiuyue didn't know that he had broken through to the perfection of the Tao Emperor realm. If he used this advantage well, he might be able to catch Bai Qiuyue by surprise. Since he didn't have any good ideas, Xiaochen quickly changed his way of thinking. He stood in Bai Qiuyue's shoes and thought about how he would deal with the Sacred Palace disciples if he was in Bai Qiuyue's shoes. After changing his way of thinking, Xiaochen quickly realized two things. The first was that Bai Qiuyue would definitely take the initiative to attack because it was impossible for Bai Qiuyue to allow him to spend half a year peacefully in the heavenly Yin Valley. Perhaps Bai Qiuyue had already made a move. After all, their whereabouts had been exposed. The second was what Bai Qiuyue was most afraid of. There was no doubt that Bai Qiuyue wasn't afraid of a head-on battle with the Sacred Palace disciples, but the Sacred Palace disciples fleeing. Because once Xiaochen and the others chose to flee, it would be very difficult for Bai Qiuyue to capture them. Begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1299. What Bai Qiuyue feared the most was that the Sacred Palace faction would fight and retreat at the same time. After all, the Sacred Palace faction didn't have many people to begin with, and all of them were monstrous geniuses. None of them were weak. In that case, the Sacred Palace faction would be able to fight like ghosts, and Bai Qiuyue would have a hard time catching them. There was only one way for Bai Qiuyue to successfully capture the Sacred Palace faction, and that was to surround them and cut off all their escape routes. Bai Qiuyue would definitely use the method of encirclement. Thinking of this, Xiaochen suddenly had an extremely risky idea, and that was to kill his way back and take the initiative to attack Bai Qiuyue. If Bai Qiuyue wanted to surround them, he would definitely send out the majority of the main faction disciples. As such, the defensive force around Bai Qiuyue would be the weakest. According to Xiaochen's estimation, Bai Qiuyue would at most leave Zhu Mujue by his side. As for the others, he would definitely be sent out to search for them. It had to be said that Xiaochen's guess was completely correct. At this moment, Bai Qiuyue indeed only had Zhu Mujue and nearly 100 main faction disciples by his side. As for the others, they had naturally been sent out by Bai Qiuyue to search for the Sacred Palace faction. Bai Qiuyue's idea was to force the Sacred Palace faction into the valley and then launch a fatal attack there. However, he had clearly neglected one point, and that was that Bai Qiuyue's own defense would be very weak. This was because there were almost no other experts around him besides Zhu Mujue, and Bai Qiuyue's own strength was not considered strong. If Xiaochen led the Sacred Palace faction to attack Bai Qiuyue at this time, the consequences were obvious. Zhu Mujue and nearly 100 main faction disciples were obviously unable to guarantee Bai Qiuyue's safety. Bai Qiuyue had neglected this point, or rather, he had never believed that Xiaochen would dare to take the initiative to attack him because wouldn't that be tantamount to walking right into a trap? Although the Sacred Palace faction was full of monsters, there were too few of them after all. If they wanted to fight the main faction head-on, they would definitely lose. So why would Xiaochen take the initiative to come after him? It was precisely because of this that Bai Qiuyue had never considered the issue of her own safety. In other words, Bai Qiuyue had never thought that the Sacred Palace would dare to take the initiative to attack. He had overlooked this point, and this gave Xiaochen an opportunity. Moreover, when faced with such an opportunity, others might hesitate and be afraid of walking into a trap, but Xiaochen was not afraid. Or perhaps it could be said that Xiaochen was a restless person. Since this was an opportunity, Xiaochen was definitely not willing to miss it. It was completely worth the risk. As long as he killed Bai Qiuyu, would the main branch still be in the mood to hunt him down? Obviously, there was none. To catch bandits, first catch the ringleader. This was the logic. With this thought in mind, Xiaochen told Chen-Ling, Long Qing, and the others his idea. When they heard Xiaochen's plan, everyone was stunned at first, but they quickly agreed that it was feasible. There were more than a dozen people from the Holy Palace. None of them objected to Xiaochen's plan after hearing it. They all felt that it was feasible and worth the risk. Therefore, it was said that one lunatic was not scary, but if a group of lunatics gathered together, it would definitely be a terrifying thing. The Holy Palace was obviously like that. Although they were few in number, each one of them was braver than the last. Everyone supported Xiaochen's plan. After a simple discussion, Xiaochen decided to take the risk and give it a try. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. Big brother, second sister, the two of you go find a disciple from the main faction and ask him about Bai Qiuyu's current location. Xiaochen said as he looked at Chen-Ling and Wang Qing. The first thing was to determine Bai Qiuyu's current location. However, this was not difficult. They could just grab any one of the several hundred disciples from the main faction and ask him. When they heard Xiaochen's words, Chen-Ling and Wang Qing did not hesitate. They immediately nodded and turned to leave. With Chen-Ling and Wang Qing taking action, it was not difficult to capture a disciple from the main faction. Therefore, after the two left, Xiaochen led everyone to find a secluded place to hide and wait for the two to return. They did not have to wait for long. Bai Qiuyu had divided the main faction disciples into more than 10 teams and sent them to encircle the Sacred Palace faction. As a result, Chen-Ling and Wang Qing easily encountered a group of main faction disciples. However, according to Xiaochen's instructions, the two did not act rashly and alert the enemy. Instead, they found an opportunity and secretly captured a main faction disciple without alerting anyone else. When Chen and Ling returned, Xiaochen knew that Bai Qiuyu had indeed sent out all her disciples to surround and annihilate them. A cold smile appeared on his face as he walked up to the main branch disciple and asked in an indifferent voice, "Is there anyone who can help? Where's Bai Qiuyu now?" This disciple was only an ordinary disciple and did not have a high status in the main faction. Therefore, Xiaochen did not ask Bai Qiuyu about her plans. He believed that this person would not know. He only asked about Bai Qiuyu's current location. As for the rest, Xiaochen was not interested and this disciple would not know. In the face of Xiaochen's inquiry, this disciple did not have any intention of cooperating at first. However, after a beating, this disciple became much more obedient and quickly sold Bai Qiuyu out. "I don't know where Senior Brother Bai is right now, but when we left, Senior Brother Bai was there." After learning that Bai Qiuyu was near the ancient tree from before, Xiaochen revealed a cold smile. It seemed that Bai Qiuyu really treated the Sacred Palace faction as prey. He had never considered his own safety and actually dared to stay in the same place. However, Bai Qiuyu clearly did not know that the position of prey and hunter could be switched. Just like now, he had sent all his disciples to encircle Xiaochen's group. Little did he know that Xiaochen was thinking of a way to kill him in one blow. He was going to kill Bai Qiuyu first. A glint flashed in Xiaochen's eyes. Then, he struck the back of the disciple's neck and directly knocked him out. He did not kill him. To Xiaochen, this disciple had no enmity with him, so it did not matter whether he killed him or not. Knocking him out was enough. After obtaining the answer he wanted, Xiaochen looked at the crowd and smiled. "Let's go and say hello to Bai Qiuyu." Hearing Xiaochen's words, everyone sneered. Then, the group turned around and rushed towards the ancient tree from before. Bai Qiuyu obviously did not expect Xiaochen's group to turn around and come back. "Please add me to your collection. Please recommend me." Chapter 1300. Bai Qiuyu was sitting alone under the ancient tree, her eyes still fixed on the map in her hands. Even now, she was still thinking about how to force the Sacred Palace faction into the valley. She didn't even think about her own safety. Beside Baiqiuyue, Zhu Mujue sat cross-legged with his eyes closed, clearly unconcerned about these matters. To Zhu Mujue, there was no enmity between him and Xiaochen, so whether or not he could kill Xiaochen did not matter much to him. Everything was just because he owed Baiqiuyue a favor and was here to repay it. Therefore, Zhu Mujue's idea was very simple. If Xiaochen came, he would take action. If he didn't, then forget it. In any case, it wouldn't affect him. Ignoring Zhu Mujue, Baiqiuyue was waiting for news from Xiaochen and the others. As long as Xiaochen and the others were forced into the valley, Baiqiuyue had full confidence that she could kill Xiaochen in one fell swoop. She was full of confidence, but Baiqiuyue obviously didn't expect that the position of the hunter and the prey had quietly changed. The Sacred Palace faction, which should have been like a turtle in a jar, was now secretly moving towards her under the lead of Xiaochen. Baiqiuyue wanted to catch a turtle in a jar, but Xiaochen wanted to take drastic measures. Soon, more than an hour passed and Xiaochen and the others were less than 10 miles away from the ancient tree. Xiaochen and the others had done their best to conceal their whereabouts along the way, so the main faction disciples under Baiqiuyue didn't discover Xiaochen and the others' whereabouts at all. Even when they knew that Xiaochen and the others were less than 10 miles away from Baiqiuyue, no one discovered them. They were already very close to the ancient tree, and Xiaochen could even vaguely sense the dozens of faint spirit power fluctuations. With the speed of Xiaochen and the others, they would be able to reach Baiqiuyue in a single charge. At this time, Xiaochen gave up on the idea of continuing to hide because if he continued to approach, it would be impossible to do so. Once he got close, Baiqiuyue and the others would definitely discover him. Moreover, Zhu Mujue was by Baiqiuyue's side. That person wasn't some weakling. Big brother, second sister, senior brother Chen, later on, the three of you will deal with Zhu Mujue. As long as you can delay him, the others will deal with the remaining disciples of the main faction. As for me, I will kill Baiqiuyue as soon as possible. Xiaochen whispered to everyone as he prepared to launch a surprise attack. They had to end this battle quickly. Otherwise, if the main branch's disciples surrounded them, it would be troublesome to escape. Their goal was very clear, and that was to kill Baiqiuyue. As for Zhu Mujue and the other main branch's disciples, Xiaochen didn't care about their lives. He only wanted to kill Baiqiuyue. Hearing Xiaochen's words, everyone nodded in agreement. Seeing this, a cold light flashed in Xiaochen's eyes as he coldly said, "Remember, this battle has to be ended quickly. Let's go." After speaking, Xiaochen took the lead and moved. He no longer cared about exposing his aura as he directly turned into a sword light and rushed towards Baiqiuyue's direction. Xiaochen's spirit power soared into the sky. At the same time, Chen Ling, Long Qing, Chen Yu and the others also followed closely behind. In an instant, the aura of the Sacred Palace faction erupted. Just as Xiaochen and the others fully unleashed their aura and rushed towards Baiqiuyue at full speed, Zhu Mujue, who had been meditating with his eyes closed, suddenly opened his eyes. He looked in the direction of Xiaochen and the others and said with a solemn expression, "Baiqiuyue, trouble is coming." Zhu Mujue was the strongest among them, so he was naturally the first to sense the aura of Xiaochen's group. As soon as Zhu Mujue's voice sounded, Baiqiuyue, who was still thinking about his plan, said in disbelief with a sunken expression, "Xiaochen." He also sensed a dozen terrifying auras rushing towards him. Baiqiuyue immediately knew that the owners of these auras were definitely from the Sacred Palace faction. He was shocked and furious at the same time. Baiqiuyue really didn't expect that Xiaochen would actually take the initiative to bring people to him. Baiqiuyue was very confident in his assassination plan, but at this moment, Xiaochen's drastic measures caught Baiqiuyue off guard. He naturally knew that the strength by his side wasn't enough to contend against the Sacred Palace faction. He had already sent out all the experts under him, so it could be said that Baiqiuyue's defense was extremely weak. Therefore, Xiaochen's group would definitely bring fatal danger to him. Bai Qiuyue gnashed his teeth. No matter how meticulous Bai Qiuyue's plan was, there was still a flaw. However, there was no time for him to think too much. The distance of less than 10 miles was almost instantly covered by Xiao Chen's group. While Bai Qiuyue was still speaking coldly, Xiao Chen and the others had already appeared in front of her. From the horizon, more than a dozen figures flew through the air. Without saying anything, they immediately launched an attack on the nearly 100 main branch disciples around Bai Qiuyue. Bai Qiuyue, run if you can. I can't stop so many of them. Zhu Mujue took a step forward and stood in front of Bai Qiuyue when he saw that Xiao Chen's group had already arrived. Tianyue, Qin Shuiruo, Fairy of 100 Flowers, Emperor Qing, and the others were already engaged in a fierce battle with the disciples of the main lineage. Xiaochen, Qinglong, Long Qing, and Qinyu, on the other hand, were rushing towards Bai Qiuyue and Zhu Mujue. Although Zhu Mujue hadn't fought with Xiao Chen's group before, he didn't think that he could contend with Xiao Chen's group alone. Therefore, Zhu Mujue immediately told Bai Qiuyue to run. However, although he said so, Zhu Mujue didn't think that Bai Qiuyue had any chance of escaping. After all, the enemy was already right in front of him. Indeed, he didn't give Bai Qiuyue any chance to escape. Xiaochen was also very clear that this was his only chance to kill Bai Qiuyue. If he couldn't kill Bai Qiuyue this time, he definitely wouldn't have such an opportunity in the future. This was because with Bai Qiuyue's character, she would definitely not suffer a second time after suffering a loss once. According to the previous agreement, Chen-Ling, Long Qing and Qinyu didn't wait for Zhu Mujue to make a move. The three of them took the initiative to find Zhu Mujue and joined forces to fight him. Chen-Ling and the other two joined forces to hold Zhu Mujue back. Zhu Mujue naturally knew the intention of Xiao Chen's group, but he had no choice but to fight with all his might. The surrounding main branch disciples were all held back, and Xiao Chen didn't have any obstructions to face Bai Qiuyue. Facing Bai Qiuyue, Xiao Chen's eyes were overflowing with killing intent as he coldly said, "Bai Qiuyue, it seems like you won't be able to escape today." Chapter 1301. Bai Qiuyue, looks like you won't be able to escape today. As soon as he finished speaking, Xiao Chen didn't even wait for Bai Qiuyue to reply before he suddenly slashed with the dustless sword in hand. He had no intention of wasting his breath on Bai Qiuyue at all. Bai Qiuyue felt his hairs stand on end when he faced Xiao Chen's attack, and he cried out in disbelief. You've broken through?" He'd always thought that Xiao Chen's cultivation was at the perfection of the Tao Emperor realm, but who would have imagined that Xiao Chen had broken through a long time ago and attained perfection of the Tao Emperor realm? Originally, Bai Qiuyue was confident that he could fight Xiao Chen for a while. After all, even though Bai Qiuyue's natural talent in cultivation wasn't good, his natural talent could absolutely be considered to be above average when compared to his older brother, Bai Qiuran. Otherwise, how could he have become a candidate of the heavenly yin-yang sect? Unfortunately, Xiao Chen's cultivation had broken through, so Bai Qiuyue was absolutely incapable of fighting him. It was even to the extent that fleeing had become an extravagant hope. Zhu Mujue had a solemn expression on his face when he sensed Xiao Chen's terrifying aura. He was already under great pressure from Chen-Ling's group of three, and he'd never imagined that they would be so strong. At this moment, when he sensed Xiao Chen's aura at the perfection of the Tao Emperor realm, Zhu Mujue was certain that Bai Qiuyue would definitely die today. He wouldn't be able to hold on until the main branch arrived to rescue him. He felt slightly bitter in his heart. At the same time, a wisp of curiosity towards the sacred palace's branch had arisen in his heart. He'd originally thought that he hadn't underestimated anyone, but reality proved that he'd still underestimated the sacred palace's branch. Just like this very moment. Zhu Mujue originally thought that he could fight Chen-Ling's group of three, and he should even be able to occupy an advantage. However, reality was completely different. Zhu Mujue wasn't able to gain the slightest advantage against them. Their joint forces were completely sufficient to suppress Zhu Mujue. It was even to the extent that Zhu Mujue determined that his chances of defeat were at least 90% if the battle continued. Chen and the other two all possessed strength that was at least comparable to the top 10 holy sons. This absolutely exceeded Zhu Mujua's expectations. He couldn't even take care of himself, so he naturally didn't have time to worry about Bai Qiuyue. On the other side, Bai Qiuyue was struck in the chest by Xiao Chen's sword after just a few moves. She was injured quite badly. Bai Qiuyue didn't even last 10 moves before being severely injured by Xiao Chen. No one had expected such an outcome. Bai Qiuyue's hair stood on end. While blocking Xiao Chen's attacks, she shouted in a deep voice. "Xiao Chen, you can't kill me. If you kill me, the Taiyang sect won't let you off." This again, using the Heavenly Yin Sun sect to threaten me. Hearing this, Xiao Chen's attack didn't slow down at all, and he sneered. "Is there any point in talking about this now? Using the Taiyang sect as an example now, but was it useful? Not to mention whether the Taiyang sect would pursue the matter. Even if they did, Xiao Chen had to kill Bai Qiuyue today. This was the Heavenly Yin Valley, and the Taiyang sect's upper echelons couldn't do anything even if they wanted to. As he spoke, Xiao Chen directly pointed his finger and executed the fish intestine sword finger, leaving Bai Qiuyue no way out. However, just as Xiao Chen was about to deal the killing blow, Zhu Mujue suddenly shouted from not far away. While fighting fiercely with Chen Ling and the other two, he shouted to Xiao Chen, "You can't kill Bai Qiuyue. He's a disciple of the Bai clan. Killing him will only bring trouble to your sacred palace. Listen to me, spare his life, and there's still room for negotiation. I can guarantee that I won't hunt you down in the Heavenly Yin Valley again." Zhu Mujue indeed didn't have a good impression of Bai Qiuyue, but seeing that Bai Qiuyue was about to be killed, he couldn't remain indifferent. After all, once Bai Qiuyue died, the matter would become serious. Moreover, with Bai Qiuran's character, there was no way she would let Zhu Mujue go. Zhu Mujue's voice was very loud. Hearing this, Xiao Chen's hand movements paused slightly. Seeing this, Zhu Mujue was overjoyed, thinking that he had persuaded Xiao Chen. Without further thought, he hurriedly said, "Xiao Chen, calm down. We're all fellow disciples of the same sect. What's there that can't be discussed properly? I guarantee that I won't let Bai Qiuyue attack you again. Don't bring trouble to the sacred palace for nothing. The Bai clan is very strong." Zhu Mujue thought that Xiao Chen had taken his words to heart. But who would have thought that just as Zhu Mujue finished speaking and Bai Qiuyue thought that she was lucky enough to survive and secretly let out a sigh of relief, Xiao Chen, who had originally stopped moving, pointed at the air and directly used the fish intestine sword finger. A blood-red sword ray rushed toward Bai Qiuyue like lightning and then accurately pierced through Bai Qiuyue's forehead between her eyebrows. Bai Qiuyue's eyes were wide open. Even in death, he probably never imagined that Xiao Chen had no intention of letting him go. He didn't listen to Zhu Mujue's words and didn't hesitate at all. The reason why Xiao Chen paused was to make Bai Qiuyue lower her guard. That way, it would be easier for him to kill her and save him the trouble of wasting more effort. Zhu Mujue was stunned for a moment when he saw Xiao Chen kill Bai Qiuyue with a single finger. Then, he roared and punched out with both fists, forcing Chen Ling and the other two to retreat. He turned and glared at Xiao Chen. At the same time, there was a trace of disbelief and shock on his face. He couldn't understand why Xiao Chen could kill Bai Qiuyue so unscrupulously. Didn't he know the consequences of killing Bai Qiuyue? Xiao Chen showed no fear in the face of the furious Zhu Mujue. The two looked at each other and Xiao Chen said indifferently, "Bai Qiuyue and Bai Qiuran must die. There's no room for negotiation between us. Also, although my sacred palace is an outsider, we don't fear any enemy. No matter what happens to the Bai family, Bai Qiuran and his brother must die. As long as I, Xiao Chen, am alive, I will not let those two brothers go. But do you still want to fight?" There was naturally no room for negotiation between Xiao Chen and Bai Qiuran. It wasn't that the two brothers weren't willing, but Xiao Chen wasn't. After what Bai Qiuran had done, it was impossible for Xiao Chen and Bai Qiuran to coexist peacefully. Only one of them could live. Killing Bai Qiuran was something Xiao Chen was determined to do. At this moment, the stubbornness in Xiao Chen's bones was naturally on full display. Zhu Mujue finally understood when he heard Xiao Chen's words. It wasn't that Bai Qiuran and his brother weren't willing to let go, but that Xiao Chen wasn't willing to let go. Zhu Mujue took a deep breath and said helplessly, "I'm not your match." Zhu Mujue's words were undoubtedly admitting defeat. Xiao Chen took a deep look at Zhu Mujue and said in a deep voice, "Let's go." Following Xiao Chen's order, the Sacred Palace group quickly disappeared into the horizon. Zhu Mujue didn't give chase and only quietly watched as the Sacred Palace group drifted away. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1302. The main reason Xiao Chen didn't kill Zhu Mujue was because he wasn't confident. This didn't mean that Xiao Chen and the other three couldn't kill Zhu Mujue, but that Xiao Chen wasn't confident that he could kill Zhu Mujue in a short time. As early as when everyone had just appeared, the disciples of the main branch had already sent out a distress signal. Presumably, the people of the main branch would soon arrive, and before they arrived, Xiao Chen did not have absolute confidence in killing Zhu Mujue. Without absolute confidence, acting rashly could very well lead to being surrounded. In addition, Zhu Mujue wasn't their target this time, and Bai Qiuyue had already successfully killed him. As such, there was no need to put himself in danger for Zhu Mujue. Moreover, Zhu Mujue had already admitted defeat, so it didn't matter whether he was killed or not. After watching Xiao Chen's group leave, Zhu Mujue walked over to Bai Qiuyue's corpse. He looked down at Bai Qiuyue's corpse from above and exhaled a turbid breath. He could already imagine what kind of huge waves would rise in the Heavenly Yin Taiyang sect after the Heavenly Yin Valley trial. While Zhu Mujue was feeling emotional, the first group of main faction disciples hurried over. However, they were clearly a step too late. By the time they arrived, Xiao Chen's group had already left. They also stared at Bai Qiuyu's body in shock. Not long after, groups of disciples from the main faction hurried back. The dozen or so candidates from the main faction, like Zhu Mujue, were currently gathered around Bai Qiuyu's body in silence. She was already dead, so there was no point in saying anything. After a long while, someone finally broke the silence. "What do we do now? Don't provoke the Sacred Palace faction for now. Let senior brother Bai Qiuran make his own decision after we leave the Heavenly Eagle Valley." Now that Bai Qiuyue was dead, their plan to kill Xiao Chen in the Heavenly Yin Valley had obviously failed. Moreover, the Sacred Palace faction had proven that they were not pushovers. If this continued, they would suffer even more casualties. Therefore, it was best to wait until they left the Heavenly Yin Valley and wait for Bai Qiuran to make her own decisions. None of the candidates objected to this suggestion. To be honest, they had no intention of continuing to hunt down the Sacred Palace faction. After keeping Bai Qiuyue's corpse, Zhu Mujue spoke up indifferently. "Since Bai Qiuyue is dead, I shall take my leave. Farewell everyone." He had no intention of getting involved with Bai Qiuran's group any longer. Since Bai Qiuyue was dead, then the debt of gratitude from before was naturally written off. Although the crowd was displeased by Zhu Mujue's words, they did not say anything. After all, Zhu Mujue was not a member of Bai Qiuran's faction. Now that he wanted to leave, they could not stop him. Without any hesitation, Zhu Mujue turned around and left as soon as he finished speaking. At the same time, 20 to 30 disciples from the main faction also left behind Zhu Mujue. Watching Zhu Mujue's departing figure, one of the candidates sighed softly. "Sigh, it seems that things have really gotten out of hand this time." One could imagine what kind of shock Bai Qiuyue's death would bring to the righteous Yin-Yang sect. Although they had anticipated the future, no one would have thought that at this moment, in a city unknown distance away from the righteous Yin-Yang sect. This city was called White Moon City, and it was the city where the Bai clan resided. White Moon City was very large, and at the center of the city was a magnificent mansion. This was where the Bai clan resided. At this moment, the main hall of the Bai clan was filled with Saint Realm experts. There were dozens of them, and among them were 3 quasi-saint great sovereigns. These people were all experts of the Bai clan. At the center of the hall, a guard knelt on the ground in horror. Seeing this, one of the quasi-saint great sovereigns on the main seat shouted. "What did you say just now? Repeat it for everyone present." Lord, it's second young master's. Second young master's life talisman, it's burned." Faced with this question, the guard's forehead was drenched in cold sweat as he stammered. A life talisman was a type of talisman unique to the Central World. After refining it, it could record the condition of a person's body. If the person was injured, the talisman would begin to burn. The more it burned, the more serious the injury would be. If the entire talisman was burned, there was only one possibility: the person had died. In the Central World, all major factions would refine life talismans for their core members. The Bai clan was naturally no exception. Just now, Bai Qiuyue's life talisman had been burned. Everyone present knew what this meant. Hearing this, the experts of the Bai clan were shocked. The quasi-saint great sovereign who had spoken just now was the current head of the Bai clan, the father of the two brothers, Bai Qiuran and Bai Qiuyue. His name was Bai Mushuang. With the death of his son, Bai Mushuang's expression had turned extremely gloomy. He swept his gaze across the crowd, and then, without any sign, he shot forth a palm strike. Before everyone's eyes, he directly killed the kneeling guard. He was smashed into a pile of flesh and blood. Seeing Bai Mushuang attack, no one said anything. They knew that the guard's death was somewhat unjust. After all, he was only responsible for guarding the life talisman and had nothing to do with Bai Qiuyue's death. Bai Mushuang had only killed him to vent his anger. But so what? After killing the guard, Bai Mushuang coldly said to the middle-aged man on his left, "Second brother, I'm afraid you'll have to make a trip to the Yin-Yang sect in person. No matter who it is, I'll make them pay the price for killing a member of the Bai clan." The middle-aged man was also a quasi-saint. He was Bai Mushuang's second brother and was called Bai Mulan. On the other side of Bai Mushuang was another middle-aged man. He was Bai Mushuang's third brother. The three brothers could be said to be the current pillars of the Bai clan. Of course, apart from the three of them, the Bai clan also had an ancestor. He was the father of the three brothers and the grandfather of Bai Qiuran and Bai Qiuyue. However, because the Bai clan's ancestor was already advanced in age and the three brothers had already attained the quasi-saint realm, the Bai clan's ancestor had retreated behind the scenes many years ago and cultivated wholeheartedly. Most of the time, he only played a symbolic role with the intention of deterring the other great clans and powers. As for the specific matters of the Bai clan, it was all decided by Bai Mushuang and the other two brothers, and the Bai clan's ancestor never asked about it. Hearing his elder brother's words, killing intent flashed through Bai Mulan's eyes. He then said indifferently, "Don't worry, elder brother. I'll capture him personally and make him pay with his life for Qiuyue. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendation." Chapter 1303. Xiaochen was naturally unaware of the Bai clan's reaction. Of course, even if Xiaochen knew, he wouldn't care too much. He had already killed Bai Qiuran, so what else could he do? He could only deal with whatever came his way. Moreover, Xiaochen wasn't really afraid of the Bai clan, especially after he'd broken through to the perfection of the Dao Emperor realm. Moreover, how could Yingyangzi allow the Bai clan to act recklessly in the heavenly Yin sect? Moreover, it wouldn't be long before Xiaochen would settle the score with Bai Qiuran. At that time, as long as he killed Bai Qiuran, Xiaochen would naturally be ranked on the hallowed rankings. Once he ascended the hallowed rankings, what could the Bai clan do to him with the protection of the will of the heavenly way? Could there be someone in the younger generation of the Bai clan who was stronger than Bai Qiuran? Due to all these reasons, Xiaochen wasn't really afraid of the Bai clan. After killing Bai Qiuyue, Xiaochen and the others were indeed much more relaxed. At the very least, the disciples of the main branch didn't come looking for trouble with them. In this way, Xiaochen and the others could naturally spend more time searching for Yin stones. No one disturbed them. 3 months passed very quickly. Coupled with the 1 month from before, it had been almost 5 months since the opening of the heavenly Unveil. There was only a little over a month left before the half-year deadline ended. During these 5 months, the disciples of the various factions who entered the heavenly Unveil could be said to be filled with joy and sorrow. Some had great gains, while others were extremely depressed. However, the situation in the heavenly Unveil was still relatively calm compared to the outside world. Especially after news of Xiaochen killing by Qiuyue had spread, the disciples of the various factions quickly calmed down after recovering from their initial shock. They didn't dare to take the initiative to look for trouble with the sacred palace. Of course, the conflicts between them had also become much more restrained because someone had died. Moreover, it was Bai Qiuyue who had died. It was obvious how much of a shock it was to the disciples of the various factions. The situation in the heavenly Unveil gradually stabilized. The disciples of the various sects also tried their best to stay out of each other's business. However, it was different in the outside world. Almost 5 months later, the experts of the Bai clan had arrived at the Taiyang sect under Bai Mulan's lead. Moreover, Bai Churan knew about her brother's death in heavenly Unveil. Without the slightest doubt, Bai Churan immediately locked onto Xiaochen of the sacred palace. Bai Churan was filled with killing intent. Bai Churan and her brother Bai Qiuyue were very close. She had already spread the word that once the matter at heavenly Unveil was settled, Bai Churan would personally kill Xiaochen. The incident in the heavenly Unveil had spread like wildfire within the sect. Many disciples were waiting for the day when the heavenly Unveil would close. At that time, there would definitely be a huge commotion. However, compared to the Sacred Palace faction, many disciples were more optimistic about Bai Churan. After all, Bai Churan was a chosen on the saint ranking and had been famous in the Taiyang sect for a long time. On the other hand, the Sacred Palace faction was only a newcomer. The matter of Xiaochen and Bai Churan had spread like wildfire within the sect. Yinyangzi naturally knew about it from his residence. The branch family member sat on a futon while an old servant leisurely brewed tea beside him. The old servant's hands never stopped moving. "Master, what should we do about Bai Churan and Xiaochen?" Yinyangzi took a sip of tea and said nonchalantly, "There's no hurry. Let's wait until the matter at heavenly Unveil is over. Who knows, that little guy might give us a surprise." The little guy Yinyangzi was referring to was naturally not Bai Churan, but Xiaochen. The old servant was a little taken aback and sighed softly. "Master, are you really going to give up on Bai Churan? Although he has some problems with his character, he's still a chosen on the saint ranking. In the entire Taiyang sect, only the old servant called Yinyangzi master. After all, he had served Yinyangzi since he was young and had always regarded himself as Yinyangzi's retainer. He had never held any position in the Taiyang sect, even when he was a half-step great saint." Hearing the old servant's sigh, Yinyangzi said softly, "Survival of the fittest, survival of the fittest. There is nothing we can do about it." The enmity between Xiaochen and Bai Churan was growing deeper and deeper. Especially after Xiaochen killed Bai Churan, there was no room for reconciliation between the two. As a result, Yinyangzi could only choose to give up on one of them. Based on the current situation, Yinyangzi clearly favored Xiaochen more. The old servant knew very well what Yinyangzi was thinking, so he didn't say anything else and just quietly brewed tea. While the outside world was in an uproar because of Bai Qiuyue's death, Chenling, Longqing, Qinyu, and Tianyu stood on a short mountain in heavenly Unveil with their eyes closed. Based on their slightly restless auras, the four of them were clearly about to break through. After almost 5 months of cultivation, the four of them had also begun to break through to the perfection of the Tao Emperor realm. Although they had broken through slightly later than Xiaochen, it wasn't too late. Moreover, once they broke through, the sacred palace's strength would definitely increase tremendously. The four of them broke through with their eyes closed. Beside them, the Qing Emperor and the others had their eyes slightly closed as they stood on guard. As for Xiaochen, he was currently standing at the edge of the mountain with a young woman in green. Both of them had very indifferent expressions as they looked down at heavenly Unveil below. The young woman was none other than Lian Yao, who'd helped him in the past. Xiaochen and the others had met Lian Yao 3 days ago. At that time, Chen Ling and the others had already begun to break through to the perfection of the Tao Emperor realm. Lian Yao had taken the initiative to look for Xiaochen. Xiaochen didn't dislike her, but he didn't have a good impression of her either. So long as she didn't offend him, Xiaochen wouldn't take the initiative to offend her. After all, Lian Yao was supported by the other chosen on the heavenly yin rankings, Yun Kunyo. Xiaochen didn't know much about Yun Kunyo, but he was certain that she was definitely much more difficult to deal with than Bai Qiuran. It wasn't just in terms of strength, even their temperaments weren't on the same level. Senior sister, there's no harm in being frank. Both of them had been silent for quite some time. In the end, Xiaochen was the first to break the silence. Lian Yao turned around to glance at Xiaochen when she heard Xiaochen, and then she said slowly, "Do you know what sort of commotion you'll cause if you kill Bai Qiuyue?" "It doesn't matter. In any case, it's impossible for Bai Qiuran and I to coexist peacefully," Xiaochen replied indifferently. "The ignorant are fearless. Have you thought about relying on Senior Sister Yun? With Senior Sister Yun's protection, even Bai Qiuran won't dare to touch you at all." Lian Yao spoke with slight displeasure when she heard Xiaochen, but she quickly changed the topic and started to rope in Xiaochen. "Please add me to your collection. Please recommend me." Chapter 1304. Lian Yao took the initiative to rope Xiaochen in. Upon hearing this, Xiaochen revealed a faint smile and stared at Lian Yao with a faint smile. He didn't expect Lian Yao to say such a thing. Facing Xiaochen's gaze, Lian Yao's pretty face blushed and she said in a somewhat displeased voice, "What's wrong?" She took the initiative to rope Xiaochen in, but after hearing this, Xiaochen didn't give a clear answer. On the contrary, he kept staring at her, which made Lian Yao very uncomfortable. In the face of Lian Yao's questioning, Xiaochen smiled, withdrew his gaze, and said indifferently, "This shouldn't be Yun Kunyo's idea, right?" Lian Yao was trying to rope him in on behalf of Yun Kunyo, but Xiaochen guessed that this was actually Lian Yao's idea and not Yun Kunyo's. The reason was very simple. Although Xiaochen had only met Yun Kunyo once, Xiaochen was certain that Yun Kunyo was an extremely arrogant woman. With her character, she definitely wouldn't take the initiative to rope him in. As for why Lian Yao did this, according to Xiaochen's understanding, it was probably to allow Yun Kunyo to have more power in the heavenly Yin Sun sect. To put it bluntly, Lian Yao felt that Xiaochen might be able to defeat Bai Qiuran. When the time came, Xiaochen would replace Bai Qiuran's position and become the new chosen on the saint rankings of the heavenly Yin Sun sect. In this way, if Xiaochen was willing to submit to Yun Kunyo, it was imaginable how much power Yun Kunyo would have in the heavenly Yin Sun sect. From then on, Yun Kunyo would definitely be the only voice in the main branch. Lian Yao did this for Yun Kunyo's sake, but she clearly didn't know Xiaochen well enough. Before Lian Yao could answer, Xiaochen glanced at her slightly changed expression and said indifferently, "Unfortunately, it's a pity that I don't submit to others. But it's a pity. I've never had the habit of relying on others. Maybe it's because of my personality since I was young. I don't like to lower my head to others." Xiaochen's words were a clear rejection of Lian Yao's invitation. Upon hearing this, Lian Yao's expression turned completely cold. She glared at Xiaochen and said with a hint of anger in her voice, "Xiaochen, do you know that without Senior Sister Yun Kunyo's help, you will definitely die once the heavenly Yin Valley is over, and Bai Qiuran will definitely not let you off." She did not expect that Xiaochen would reject her so directly. He did not even think about it. This made Lian Yao feel humiliated. Therefore, she could not help but feel angry. However, Xiaochen didn't care about Lian Yao's anger at all. First of all, Xiaochen wasn't afraid of Lian Yao at all with his current combat strength. Secondly, even if he faced Bai Qiuran, Xiaochen wasn't afraid at all. Just because he didn't want to provoke her didn't mean that he was afraid. Therefore, Xiaochen replied with a smile on his face, "You don't have to worry about that. I've already said that we'll deal with whatever comes our way. As for who will emerge victorious in the end, I'm afraid we still don't know. Xiaochen wasn't afraid of Bai Qiuran and the Bai family, nor did he have any intention of borrowing Yin Kunyo's power. Lian Yao didn't say anything else after hearing Xiaochen's words. Humph, I hope junior brother doesn't regret it. Lian Yao turned around and left. In Lian Yao's opinion, Xiaochen didn't know what was good for him. He even dared to reject Yin Kunyo's recruitment. Didn't he know how many people in the Heavenly Yin Solar sect wanted to follow Yin Kunyo but failed? With Yin Kunyo's strength and status, she didn't need to take the initiative to recruit anyone in the Heavenly Yin Solar sect. To put it bluntly, she only needed to say a word and there would definitely be many people willing to work for her. However, Xiaochen clearly wasn't among them. No matter what status Yin Kunyo had, Xiaochen wouldn't rely on her. Or rather, Xiaochen didn't want to rely on others. The same was true for the Heavenly Yin Solar sect. If it weren't for the fact that the Heavenly Yin Solar sect was structured like an alliance, Xiaochen probably wouldn't have agreed to let the Sacred Palace rely on the Heavenly Yin Solar sect. Therefore, even now, Xiaochen still didn't treat himself as a disciple of the Heavenly Yin Solar sect. Of course, Yin Yangzi didn't force Xiaochen either. This was the fundamental reason why Xiaochen was willing to stay in the Heavenly Yin Solar sect. Lian Yao left without looking back. As soon as she left, Qin Shuru and the other two girls came to Xiaochen. 100 Flower Fairy asked with a smile, "What's wrong? Did the negotiation fall apart?" She wanted me to rely on Yin Kunyo, but I rejected her. Xiaochen naturally didn't hide anything from 100 Flower Fairy and told the three girls the truth. 100 Flower Fairy's smile didn't fade when she heard Xiaochen's words. "I knew you would say that, but I'm afraid there will be some trouble in the future." Although Xiaochen's rejection today didn't offend Yin Kunyo, it definitely offended Lian Yao. If Lian Yao took the initiative to find trouble with Xiaochen in the future, Xiaochen naturally wouldn't stand by and do nothing. Therefore, 100 Flower Fairies seemed to have guessed that there would be a lot of trouble in the future. They hadn't dealt with Bai Qiuran yet, and now there was the possibility of offending the even more terrifying Yin Kunyo. Xiaochen smiled bitterly in his heart when he heard 100 Flower Fairies' words. Given Xiaochen's impression of Yin Kunyo, if she were to find out about what had happened today, it would not only be a possibility, it would definitely be very troublesome. Yin Kunyo would definitely come looking for trouble with him. As for the reason, it was very simple. Yin Kunyo was like a queen who wouldn't allow anyone to disobey her. Therefore, after today's incident, Yin Kunyo would definitely seek revenge. But even then, Xiaochen still didn't regret his choice. It couldn't be helped. Xiaochen wasn't willing to rely on others, and he wouldn't lower his head. Who cares, there will be a time when it'll be resolved. He didn't want to think about it anymore. After waiting on the short mountain for 3 days, Chenling, Longqing, Chenyu, and Tianyu finally broke through successfully. All four of them had successfully broken through from the perfection of the Dao Emperor realm to the perfection of the Dao Emperor realm. Xiaochen heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. After all, their breakthroughs were definitely good news for the Sacred Palace. Before their breakthroughs, the four of them already possessed the strength of the top 10 candidates. Now that they'd broken through together, their strength would definitely not be inferior to Lian Yao and Zhu Mujue. It could be said that the breakthrough of Chenling and the other three had forcefully raised the strength of the Sacred Palace faction to a whole new level. Although their numbers were still small, their strength had improved by leaps and bounds. Xiaochen estimated that the current Sacred Palace faction, with just the 5 of them, would be able to contend with the other 5 factions outside of the main faction. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1305. Chenling and the other three's breakthroughs had indeed dispelled the haze in Xiaochen's heart to a large extent. It also gave Xiaochen hope. Yes, Xiaochen wasn't alone. He had Chenling, Longqing, and the others by his side. As long as everyone worked together, Xiaochen didn't believe that they wouldn't be able to gain a foothold in the Taiyang sect. Imagine if the Sacred Palace had 4 or even 5 chosen on the saint ranking. At that time, even the main branch would have to bow their heads. Everything still depended on strength. Qianling and the other three's breakthroughs gave Xiaoqian hope. With the haze in his heart swept away, Xiaoqian smiled and congratulated the four. He then told them what Lian Yao had said. When they heard that Lian Yao wanted to rope in Xiaoqian, the four's attitude was the same as Xiao Chen's. None of them agreed. The disciples of the sacred palace had never had the habit of relying on others or submitting to others. Xiaoqian and the others no longer thought about it. Over the next month, they continued to cultivate step by step. With the help of the Yin Wind stones, Xiaoqian's cultivation had completely stabilized. Moreover, he was indeed much stronger than when he had just broken through. Of course, apart from Xiaoqian, the others also had their own gains. Seeing that the half-year period in the heavenly Yin Valley was about to end, everyone had gained a lot in the past 6 months. However, with the end of the heavenly Yin Valley, the sacred palace would soon have to face the wrath of the Bai family and Bai Qiuran. More than a month passed in the blink of an eye for cultivators of Xiao Chen's level. On this day, Xiaoqian and the others finished refining the last batch of Yin Wind stones on their bodies. They stood side by side on a plain and looked at the distant horizon. Today was the day that the heavenly Yin Valley ended and everyone would be forcibly teleported out. What will come sooner or later. Let's see what the Bai family wants this time, Xiaoqian said indifferently as he looked straight at the sky. There was no doubt that the Bai family and Bai Qiuran were waiting outside heavenly Yin Valley. Xiaoqian had expected this. Having learned about the natal talisman from Lian Yao, Xiaoqian knew that Bai Qiuyue's death could not be concealed. Therefore, Xiaoqian could guess the reaction of the Bai family and Bai Qiuran. Qianling and the others remained calm when they heard Xiao Chen's words. Regardless of whether it was the Bai clan or Bai Qiuran, none of them feared them. They had long been prepared to deal with the arrival of this day. Not long after Xiao Chen's words sounded, a mysterious energy enveloped everyone's bodies. Under the cover of this energy, no one had the slightest intention to resist. They could only allow themselves to be forcefully transported out of the heavenly Yin Valley. Not only Xiaoqian and the others, but the other disciples of the major factions who had entered the heavenly Yin Valley were also transported out one by one. In less than 10 minutes, many disciples appeared outside the heavenly Yin Valley one after another. However, when they appeared, the first thing they saw was the main branch disciples led by Bai Qiuran and the Bai family experts led by Bai Mulin. This time, the Bai family was clearly furious. Not only did they send Bai Mulin, a quasi-saint supreme venerate, but they also sent 8 saint stage experts. When they saw Bai Qiuran and Bai Mulin standing outside the heavenly Yin Valley with gloomy expressions, the disciples understood what had happened. After all, the news that Xiaoqian had killed Bai Qiuyue had already spread in the heavenly Yin Valley. It was no secret. Almost all the disciples who had entered the heavenly Yin Valley knew about it. The disciples of the major factions didn't want to get involved in this mess, so they naturally took the initiative to step aside. Bai Qiuran didn't say anything about this and allowed them to leave. Compared to the disciples of the other factions, the people of the main branch who belonged to Bai Qiuran's camp respectfully came before her. The leader of the group, a dozen or so prospective saints, spoke with some apprehension. Senior brother, they were all on Bai Qiuran's side, so they naturally felt apprehensive when facing her. After all, Bai Qiuyue was killed in the heavenly Yin Valley, so they couldn't escape responsibility. However, Bai Qiuran didn't get angry. She looked at the dozen or so people in front of her and interrupted them before they could speak. "Where's my brother's corpse?" She didn't reprimand or blame them. Instead, she asked where Bai Qiuyue's corpse was. Upon hearing Bai Qiuran's question, one of the prospective saints hurriedly took out Bai Qiuyue's corpse. Looking at the corpse, killing intent gathered in Bai Qiuran's eyes, but she eventually waved her hand and said to a main branch disciple behind her, "Send my brother back first." She ordered someone to send Bai Qiuyue's corpse back, while Bai Qiuran continued to wait outside the heavenly Yin Valley with her people. This time, Bai Qiuran didn't hold back at all. There were thousands of main branch disciples behind her, all of whom were on her side. Moreover, all of them were elites, and the weakest was a core disciple. Naturally, no one dared to provoke such a lineup. Even Lianyao and Jumujua, who also belonged to the main branch, didn't dare to provoke Baichuran. Instead, they left with their people. Of course, no one wanted to provoke Baichuran, but they didn't go far. After all, no one wanted to miss such a storm. For a time, more and more disciples gathered outside the heavenly Yin Valley. Under the watchful eyes of countless people, Xiaochen and the others from the sacred palace finally appeared in front of everyone on the square. At a glance, they saw Baichuran and the main branch disciples blocking their way. Xiaochen's group didn't change their expressions in the slightest. Xiaochen even sneered. What a big lineup. Baichuran, it seems that you're only that bold. To think that you'd have to put on such a big lineup before you dare to come and denounce us. His words were filled with disdain. Killing intent flashed in Baichuran's eyes when she heard this. The disciples of the various factions began to whisper amongst themselves. Most people naturally thought that Xiaochen had died because he didn't know what was good for him. Lianyao even snorted coldly. You really don't know what's good for you? Do you really think that Baichuran won't dare to kill you? Or do you think that the few of you from the sacred palace are enough to contend with the thousands of people behind Baichuran? Lianyao was naturally unhappy with Xiaochen's rejection. Now that Xiaochen still didn't know what was good for him, she couldn't help but feel angry. Perhaps in Lianyao's opinion, Xiaochen should be kneeling in front of her and begging for Yunkunyo to protect them. After offending Baichuran, Yunkunyo was the only one in the entire Taiyang sect who could protect Xiaochen and the others. Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 1306. Lianyao felt that Xiaochen was courting death. She looked at Xiaochen with a sneer as if she was looking forward to Xiaochen being killed by Baichuran on the spot. Xiaochen naturally didn't know what Lianyao was thinking because he didn't have the time to pay attention to this woman. From the beginning to the end, Xiaochen's eyes were locked on Baichuran. In the face of Xiaochen's gaze and his casual words, the killing intent in Baichuran's heart had risen to the extreme. Not only did he kill Baichuyue, but he also dared to be so arrogant in the face of death. When their eyes met, the killing intent in Baichuran's eyes seemed to have turned into two sharp blades. However, Xiaochen didn't seem to feel Baichuran's killing intent at all. His expression didn't change at all, and the corners of his mouth even curled into a faint smile. Half a year was enough for the situation to change a lot. For example, now that he was facing Baichuran, Xiaochen didn't feel as great pressure as he did half a year ago. The difference between a 99-meter talent and a 98-meter talent seemed to be only 1 meter, but the difference was far from that simple. Baichuran believed Baichuyue's words and gave Xiaochen half a year. It could be said that this was Baichuran's biggest mistake. In this half a year, Xiaochen had survived the most dangerous period. It also allowed Xiaochen to grow and possess the ability to contend with Baichuran. Although Xiaochen's strength wasn't necessarily stronger than Baichuran's, it definitely wouldn't be easy for Baichuran to kill Xiaochen. This was the change brought about by half a year. Xiaochen was still calm in the face of Baichuran. In response, Baichuran snorted coldly and said, "Xiaochen, today is the day you die." With that, Baichuran directly attacked. She took a step forward and threw a punch at Xiaochen. In the face of Baichuran's attack, Xiaochen didn't reply. However, he also moved. Instead of dodging, he moved to meet Baichuran. Seeing that Xiaochen didn't dodge and wanted to meet Baichuran head-on, the surrounding disciples were stunned. They all looked at Xiaochen as if they were looking at an idiot. This guy is definitely stupid. He actually dares to meet Baichuran head-on? Does he really have a death wish? Many of the disciples had such thoughts in their hearts. Since Baichuran was able to become one of the saints on the holy rankings, her strength was definitely undeniable. The reason was simple. The holy rankings of the central world were created by the will of the heavenly way, so there was no possibility of falsification. Without strength, no matter how high one's status was, it was impossible for one to enter the holy rankings. Under everyone's gaze, Xiaochen and Bai Qiuran's fists collided in midair. However, the expected scene of Xiaochen being severely injured didn't happen. Xiaochen's growth was truly too swift, and it was swift to the point Bai Qiuran was caught off guard. She couldn't give Xiaochen any more chances or time. She had to kill this fellow today no matter what. As she thought in her heart, Bai Qiuran released a layer of faint fluctuations of lightning. It was the energy of the laws of lightning. At the same time, her aura rose incessantly, and it didn't take long for her to attain perfection in the Tao Emperor realm. As a chosen on the hallowed rankings, even though Bai Qiuran's cultivation was only at the perfection of the Tao Emperor realm, her aura wasn't inferior to an ordinary Saint realm expert. Someone at the perfection of the Tao Emperor realm actually possessed aura comparable to an ordinary Saint realm expert. This was how terrifying a chosen on the hallowed rankings was. The expressions of all the disciples in the surroundings changed when they sensed Bai Qiuran's shocking aura. At the same time, some of them even spoke out. Senior brother Bai is infuriated. Looks like Xiaochen will definitely die today. Exactly. How could he possibly go against senior brother Bai? Senior brother Bai is a chosen on the hallowed rankings. Begging to be collected, begging to be recommended. Chapter 1307. Earlier, when Xiaochen took Bai Qiuran's punch head-on, the expressions of the surrounding disciples changed. However, when Bai Qiuran's aura erupted, the surrounding disciples instantly changed their minds. After all, Bai Qiuran had made a name for herself in the Taiyang sect of Heavenly Yin for many years, and she was the chosen of the saint ranking. Xiaochen, on the other hand, was just a nobody. Therefore, these disciples naturally thought more highly of Bai Qiuran. Her terrifying aura spread wildly. At the same time, the law of lightning around her became denser. One could even see bolts of lightning crisscrossing around her. Facing Bai Qiuran, who had made up her mind to kill Xiaochen today no matter what, Xiaochen's expression did not change. At the same time, a terrifying aura burst out of his body. This aura was not much weaker than Bai Qiuran's aura. The two could be said to be evenly matched. Sensing the aura in Xiaochen's body, Bai Qiuran's expression became even more anxious. At the same time, the killing intent in her heart became even denser. He must die. Today, she must kill Xiaochen here. Otherwise, he would be a great threat in the future. With that in mind, Bai Qiuran's storage ring flashed with light, and a short knife appeared in her hand. The short knife's shape was very strange. It looked like a dagger, but the head was flat and only had one edge. It was very short. At the same time, Bai Qiuran held the knife in a reverse grip. This was the first time she had seen such a weapon. However, before Xiaochen could react, Bai Qiuran had already attacked. She slashed with the short knife in her hand and shouted coldly. White water. The knife technique Bai Qiuran used was called the Bai clan's 3 blades. It was the Bai clan's top martial technique. It was at the mid-grade saint level. It was a minor level higher than Xiaochen's 9 sifting sword qi and fish intestine sword finger. White water was the first of the Bai clan's 3 blades. As soon as the knife was unleashed, Bai Qiuran's spiritual energy frantically surged towards the blade. At the same time, the law of lightning rapidly gathered. A moment later, a white saber light streaked across the sky. It was shaped like a white fish. At first glance, Bai Qiuran's attack didn't exude any terrifying aura, but Xiaochen, who was facing it directly, sensed a fatal danger from it. Therefore, Xiaochen did not have time to think too much. With a thought, the dustless sword appeared in his hand. He suddenly slashed out with the 9 sifting sword qi. 2 saint rank martial skills collided. However, Bai Qiuran's 3 swords were at the mid-rank of the saint rank while the Azura sword qi was only at the low rank of the saint rank. So, Xiaochen knew from the very beginning that a single strand of Azura sword qi would definitely be unable to stop Bai Qiuran's attack. After the first slash, Xiaochen did not pause at all. He slashed out 2 more times in succession. A total of 3 strands of Azura Sword Chi shot towards Baichuran's white fish. The 3 strands of Azura Sword Chi would definitely be able to stop Baichuran's attack, Xiaochen thought. However, to his surprise, after the 2 attacks collided, Xiaochen's 3 strands of Azura Sword Chi were easily destroyed by Baichuran's attack. Shock flashed through Xiaochen's eyes. He could not believe it. How was this possible? Even if Baichuran's 3 swords were at the mid-rank of the Saint rank, 3 strands of Azura Sword Chi should not be unable to stop a single attack. There was no time to think because Baichuran's attack had already broken through Xiaochen's 3 strands of Azura Sword Chi and was heading straight for Xiaochen. He had no choice but to raise his sword to block. The dustless sword and Baichuran's blade collided. Because he had already used 3 strands of Azura Sword Chi before, he had not been able to stop the attack, but he had indeed lost a lot of power. After coming into direct contact with Baichuran's attack, Xiaochen finally sensed the power of the attack. Furthermore, he could roughly guess why the 3 strands of Azura Sword Chi could not stop Baichuran's attack. It was not because of the difference in martial skills, nor was it because of the difference in grade. It was because of the power of laws. Baichuran's law of lightning was clearly much more powerful than Xiaochen's laws of force and laws of speed. The reason the 3 strands of Azura Sword Chi hadn't been able to stop Baichuran's attack was because the gap between their laws was truly too obvious. Xiaochen's Azura Sword Chi was enhanced by the laws of force and laws of speed, while Baichuran was naturally enhanced by the laws of lightning. Their laws weren't equal at all. That was why even though Xiaochen had successively executed 3 strands of Azura Sword Chi, he was still unable to stop Baichuran's attack. In the end, he was able to stop Baichuran's attack safely. However, Baichuran started laughing coldly when she saw this. An ant will always be an ant. Xiaochen, do you think you can fight me just because you've broken through? Do you know that there are countless people in the younger generation of the Central World who have broken through to the perfection stage of the Tao Emperor realm, but only 108 of them were able to ascend onto the hallowed rankings in the end? The gap between them isn't something that can be made up for with a similar level of cultivation. So what if you've broken through to the perfection stage of the Tao Emperor realm? Do you think you possess the strength to go against me? Baichuran had naturally discerned Xiaochen's strength. To be honest, it had exceeded Baichuran's expectations, but it wasn't to the point that Baichuran was helpless against him. After all, there were only 108 chosen on the hallowed rankings in the entire Central World. If he could go against a chosen on the hallowed rankings by merely equaling their cultivations, then wouldn't it mean that the chosen on the hallowed rankings were trash? Baichuran shouted coldly. Xiaochen was filled with a myriad of emotions when he heard this. Xiaochen wasn't too far behind Baichuran in terms of cultivation, but it was different in other aspects. For example, Baichuran was clearly much stronger than him in terms of the laws. The laws. Xiaochen muttered inwardly. He didn't expect to be at a disadvantage in terms of the laws in the end. Of course, this was to be expected. After all, a cultivator's strength wasn't just judged by their cultivation. Baichuran struggled to block Baichuran's attack. Seeing this, Baichuran didn't give Xiaochen any time to catch his breath. She immediately charged at Xiaochen with her blade in hand. Baichuran sneered at Xiaochen, her eyes overflowing with killing intent. Xiaochen, I won't make the same mistake twice. I must kill you today. I won't give you the slightest chance. Baichuran had listened to Baichuyua's words and given Xiaochen half a year's time for nothing. In the end, not only did she fail to eliminate Xiaochen, but she also lost Baichuyua's life. At this moment, Baichuran understood that eliminating Xiaochen was an urgent matter. She couldn't give Xiaochen the slightest chance or time. This guy's speed of improvement was too terrifying. Please add me to your collection. Please recommend me. Chapter 1308. Baichuran was determined to kill Xiaochen today. She did not care what price she had to pay. To be honest, Xiao Chen's rate of improvement had already made Bai Qiuran feel slightly terrified. In just half a year, Xiao Chen had already possessed such strength. If Xiao Chen was given another half a year, wouldn't even Bai Qiuran be able to suppress him? She knew that Xiao Chen was not much weaker than her in terms of cultivation. The gap between them lay in other aspects. One was accumulation, the other was comprehension of the power of laws. Accumulation was very simple. After all, Xiao Chen was not from the central world. His accumulation was definitely not as good as Bai Qiuran's. The same was true for the power of laws. After all, there was no complete method to comprehend the power of laws in the northern star boundary. These 2 points were Xiao Chen's greatest weaknesses. With Xiao Chen's talent, Xiao Chen would definitely be able to make up for these 2 shortcomings in the shortest amount of time possible. Therefore, Bai Qiuran did not dare hesitate any longer. She did not dare give Xiao Chen any more chances. Xiao Chen was naturally at a disadvantage against Bai Qiuran's frenzied attacks. However, he was still able to resist for a while. After all, it was not half a year ago. Xiao Chen was no longer a helpless fellow against Bai Qiuran. Bai Qiuran did not feel the slightest bit of joy when she saw Xiao Chen gradually falling into a disadvantageous position. The reason was simple. Even though Xiao Chen had been suppressed by her, Bai Qiuran had been unable to deal a fatal blow to Xiao Chen from beginning to end. Bai Qiuran's goal in this battle was not to win, but to kill Xiao Chen. However, Xiao Chen was like a cockroach. She was unable to injure him at all. It felt like the battle was going on for a long time. The disciples in the surroundings were all stunned as they watched the intense battle between the 2 of them. Everyone looked surprised. They were surprised by the power that Xiao Chen had displayed. It's already been over 100 moves. Senior brother Bai still hasn't won. That's right, even senior brother Zhu Mujue and senior sister Lian Yao wouldn't be able to last so long against senior brother Bai. You mean to say that Xiao Chen's strength is above senior Zhu Mujue and senior Lian Yao? Over 100 moves had passed, but the outcome of the battle still hadn't been decided. Moreover, everyone was able to discern that Bai Qiuran wasn't holding back at all. Under Bai Qiuran's all-out attack, Xiao Chen had actually managed to hold on. Even though he was at a complete disadvantage and was completely suppressed, he was still undefeated. This was enough to shock all the disciples in the surroundings. After all, just a moment ago, they thought that Xiao Chen was no match for Bai Qiuran and would definitely be instantly killed. The atmosphere in the field became very strange. Bai Qiuran, who clearly had the overall advantage, did not receive the support of a single person. On the other hand, although Xiao Chen was at a disadvantage, he still shocked everyone. Even Lian Yao, who disliked Xiao Chen, was stunned on the spot, and she spoke with slight disbelief. How could he be so strong? Didn't he just break through to the perfection stage of the Tao Emperor realm? Xiao Chen had broken through to the perfection stage of the Tao Emperor realm in Heavenly Yin Valley, and he'd broken through less than half a year ago. There was no need to doubt that. However, it was exactly this person who could be said to have just broken through to the perfection stage of the Tao Emperor realm, yet he was able to go toe-to-toe with Bai Qiuran. At the very least, Lian Yao knew that she was unable to accomplish that. She was shocked. Right at this moment, a young woman in a black dress suddenly appeared by Lian Yao's side. Lian Yao hurriedly bowed respectfully when she sensed the young woman's appearance. Senior sister. The person who had come was none other than the other holy son of the heavenly Yin Taiyang sect, Yun Kunyo. Yun Kunyo paid no attention to Lian Yao's thoughts and just gazed indifferently at the intense battle below. To be more precise, Yun Kunyo's gaze was mostly on Xiao Chen. A wisp of bright light flashed through her eyes from time to time. No one knew what Yun Kunyo was thinking. Yun Kunyo's appearance didn't alarm too many people, but Bai Qiuran grew more and more impatient as the battle dragged on. She felt that the battle couldn't drag on any longer. As such, Bai Qiuran actually disregarded the existence of the numerous disciples in the surroundings and shouted coldly to Bai Mushuang and the other disciples from the main branch behind her, "Attack! Kill the members of the sacred palace." As a chosen on the hallowed rankings, Bai Qiuran had actually given up on a fair battle with Xiao Chen and had chosen to gang up on him. Clearly, such an action would cause all the disciples present to oppose it. It was indeed so. As soon as Bai Qiuran finished speaking, the disciples in the surroundings were first stunned, but it wasn't long before they revealed a wisp of disdain. For a time, Bai Qiuran's prestige in the hearts of the disciples dropped significantly. From beginning to end, Chen Ling, Long Qing and the others had no intention of interfering at all. Even Xiao Chen dared to fight Bai Qiuran fairly, but Bai Qiuran was cowardly. What could the disciples think? Bai Qiuran knew the consequences of such an action, but she couldn't care less about that right now. She only had one thought in her mind, and that was to kill Xiao Chen as soon as possible. As long as she could kill Xiao Chen, she didn't care about anything else. As for losing face, that could only be dealt with in the future. Following Bai Qiuran's cold shout, the main branch disciples behind her were all stunned. Clearly, as Bai Qiuran's subordinates, they had never expected her to give such an order. In the end, Bai Mushuang was the first to recover from his shock and roared, "Kill!" With Bai Mushuang's command and him taking the lead, everyone finally recovered from their shock and charged towards Xiao Chen. As the Bai family and the main branch disciples attacked, the Sacred Palace group naturally wouldn't allow themselves to be captured without putting up a fight. Chen Ling, Long Qing, Chen Yu, Tian Yu and the others were the first to attack, followed by Emperor Qing and the others. It was about to turn into a chaotic battle, and once it did, the outcome was obvious. How could the Sacred Palace group be a match for the Bai family and the main branch disciples? However, just as the battle was about to erupt, two figures suddenly appeared beside Xiao Chen and Bai Qiuran. The two figures had appeared silently, and one of them had captured Bai Qiuran with lightning speed. One of them held Bai Qiuran's right arm, while the other held Bai Qiuran's throat. These two were none other than Long Yang and Feng Zhu, who had been staying in the Taiyang sect. Long Yang instantly subdued Bai Qiuran, and no one was able to react in time. At the same time, Long Yang revealed a faint smile as he looked at the people of the Bai family and the disciples of the main branch charging over and chuckled. "It's best if you don't move. I get nervous easily, and it won't be good if I accidentally hurt the young master of your Bai family. Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendation." Chapter 1309. Bai Qiuran had fallen into Long Yang's hands before she even had time to react. Part of it was Bai Qiuran's own carelessness. After all, Long Yang and Feng Zhu had appeared out of nowhere. Bai Qiuran was completely unprepared, but apart from that, the difference in strength between Bai Qiuran and Long Yang could not be ignored. If Long Yang did not possess enough strength to crush Bai Qiuran, he would not have been able to subdue Bai Qiuran so easily. A faint smile hung on Long Yang's face as he spoke in an indifferent voice. Following his words, the disciples from the main branch in the Bai clan, who were originally charging over in a menacing manner, all came to a stop. They had no choice. Now that Bai Qiuran had fallen into Long Yang's hands, they naturally did not dare to act rashly. Long Yang continued to smile when he saw everyone's actions. Very good. With that, he turned to look at Bai Qiuran. Bai Qiuran's expression was unimaginable after being firmly subdued by Long Yang. When she met Long Yang's gaze, Bai Qiuran could no longer hold back and shouted. "Long Yang, what do you mean? This is a matter of our Taiyang sect. What does it have to do with you? What right do you have to interfere?" Knowing that she was no match for Long Yang, Bai Qiuran shouted coldly. As soon as she finished speaking, Yun Kunyo's figure appeared on the battlefield and she said expressionlessly, "Don't worry. Long Yang, this indeed has nothing to do with you." Even Long Yang and Feng Zhu had appeared, so Yun Kunyo naturally could not sit by and do nothing. The reason why she said that was not because she wanted to help Bai Qiuran, but because this matter had nothing to do with Long Yang and Feng Zhu. To put it bluntly, the enmity between Xiao Chen and Bai Qiuran was a matter of the Taiyang sect. As members of the Beast clan, Long Yang and Feng Zhu naturally had no right to interfere. However, Long Yang remained unmoved when he heard Bai Qiuran and Yun Kunyu's words. He turned to Xiaochen and smiled. Brother Xiaochen, what do you think? Just say the word and I'll kill him for you right now. He didn't care about Bai Qiuran at all. Hearing Long Yang's words, Bai Milan shouted coldly, Long Yang, if you dare to kill Qiuran, my Bai family won't let you off. As a holy son ranked third on the saint rankings, Bai Milan naturally knew about Long Yang. He was afraid that Long Yang would hurt Bai Qiuran. Bai Milan couldn't care about anything else and shouted angrily. However, in the face of Bai Milan's reprimand, Long Yang did not mind at all. He curled his lips and said, what a joke. I will stand here and let you kill me. Do you dare? Bai Milan was a quasi-saint, but Long Yang didn't fear him at all. As a saint on the saint rankings, he had the protection of the will of the heavenly way. Would Bai Milan dare to kill him? Hearing Long Yang's words, Bai Milan's face was filled with unwillingness. That's right, would he dare to kill Long Yang? Obviously not. As long as he attacked Long Yang, the will of the heavenly way would definitely kill him immediately. Bai Milan stood there angrily. He didn't know what to do. He couldn't attack Long Yang, but among his peers, let alone his Bai family, even if it was the Sun Yang sect, who could be Long Yang's opponent? The matter seemed to have reached a stalemate. Long Yang had no intention of letting Bai Qiuran go. The Bai family and the surrounding disciples didn't dare to act rashly. At this moment, Xiaochen, who had been silent all this time, slowly walked to Long Yang's side and smiled. Brother Long Yang, thank you. However, I must end this person's life with my own hands. Xiaochen was naturally grateful for Long Yang and Feng Zhu's appearance. He knew that the two of them were helping him. Otherwise, why would the two of them care about this matter? Long Yang didn't say anything after hearing Xiaochen's words. Chen Ling and the others stood behind Xiaochen with indifferent expressions. Xiaochen wanted to kill Bai Qiuran with his own hands. If they had heard this before, they would have definitely thought that it was a joke. However, after witnessing the battle between Xiaochen and Bai Qiuran with their own eyes, no one thought so anymore. Indeed, in terms of combat strength, Xiaochen wasn't a match for Bai Qiuran. However, it had only been half a year, and Xiaochen already had the strength to contend with Bai Qiuran. If Xiaochen was given more time, it would be hard to say whether Bai Qiuran would still be a match for Xiaochen. Bai Qiuran's strength was terrifying, but Xiaochen's growth speed was even more shocking. As soon as Xiaochen finished speaking and everyone present had different expressions, the old servant beside Yin Yangzi appeared. With the appearance of the old servant, everyone present knew that Yin Yangzi already knew what had happened here. In fact, Yin Yangzi had been paying attention to everything here from the beginning. Firstly, he wanted to see how much Xiaochen had grown in the past half a year. Secondly, he wanted to give Bai Qiuran another chance. However, in the end, Bai Qiuran made Yin Yangzi completely lose confidence. On the other hand, Yin Yangzi was extremely gratified by Xiaochen's growth. He had grown to such a level in half a year. This was a monstrous prodigy with a 99-meter talent. He was far from what Bai Qiuran could compare to. Therefore, after this incident, Yin Yangzi could be said to have completely given up on Bai Qiuran and firmly chose Xiaochen. The appearance of the old servant also represented Yin Yangzi's attitude. As soon as the old servant appeared, he looked at Xiaochen with a hint of curiosity in his eyes. He sized him up before turning his gaze to Bai Qiuran. Long Yang, let him go. After all, he's a disciple of our Tianyin Taiyang sect. The old servant said. Long Yang pursed his lips but still let Long Yang go. Bai Qiuran was furious when she broke free from Long Yang's control. She was about to roar when the old servant spoke first. All right, this matter ends here. Bai Qiuran, take your people and leave. And you, the Bai family, must leave the Tianyin Taiyang sect by today. The old servant's words were clearly protecting Xiaochen. Bai Qiuran's anger grew. She had to get rid of Xiaochen as soon as possible. She couldn't give him any more time or opportunity. Bai Qiuran knew this very well. Now, the old servant actually wanted her to leave and even wanted to expel the Bai family. This was undoubtedly protecting Xiaochen. The old servant's attitude naturally represented Yinyangzi's attitude. No matter how stupid Bai Qiuran was, she knew what Yinyangzi meant. However, she was unwilling to give up. Therefore, after the old servant finished speaking, Bai Qiuran stood there with no intention of leaving. Seeing that Bai Qiuran had no intention of obeying, the old servant exuded a faint chill and shouted, "Bai Qiuran, didn't you hear what I said?" The old servant was a little angry, but at the same time, Xiaochen took a step forward and stood in front of Bai Qiuran. The two faced each other and Xiaochen said indifferently, "Bai Qiuran, you want to kill me? Perfect, I want to kill you too. I'll give you a chance. In 3 months, we'll fight to the death. Do you dare?" Begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 13:10. Xiaochen took the initiative to propose a 3-month battle with Bai Qiuran. As soon as he said that, the surrounding disciples burst into an uproar. After all, once the battle was decided, there was no way to change it. At that time, both Xiaochen and Bai Qiuran would have to rely on their own strength and wouldn't be able to rely on anyone else. No one expected Xiaochen to propose a battle to the death with Bai Qiuran at this time. Moreover, it was only 3 months away. What could they do in 3 months? At their level, 3 months would pass by just casually cultivating in seclusion. Some people thought that Xiaochen was crazy. The appearance of the old servant and his attitude undoubtedly showed that he was here to protect Xiaochen. At this time, Xiaochen didn't even need to say anything. Bai Qiuran definitely couldn't do anything to Xiaochen today because the old servant represented Yinyangzi. They clearly didn't need to do anything to resolve the crisis at hand. However, Xiaochen took the initiative to propose a battle to the death with Bai Qiuran. The time was only 3 months later. Everyone had their own thoughts, but compared to them, Bai Qiuran was a little uncertain. If it were before, Bai Qiuran would definitely agree without hesitation if Xiaochen proposed a battle to the death under such circumstances. After all, it was only 3 months later. What could they do in 3 months? But it was different now. Xiaochen's improvement in the past 6 months had made Bai Qiuran feel a fatal threat. Now, Xiaochen took the initiative to propose a battle to the death in 3 months. To be honest, Bai Qiuran wasn't confident at all. Who knew how much Xiaochen would grow in 3 months with his talent? Therefore, Bai Qiuran didn't want to agree to Xiaochen's battle to the death. Bai Qiuran wanted to kill Xiaochen on the spot to prevent future trouble. Unfortunately, the old servant beside Yinyangzi was present. Bai Qiuran definitely couldn't succeed. Moreover, Long Yang and Feng Zhu were standing beside Xiaochen. Under the overall situation, it was obviously impossible for Bai Qiuran to kill Xiaochen on the spot. If she persisted, not only would she bring disaster to herself, but also the Bai family. There were only 2 choices before Bai Qiuran. She could either leave with her people or agree to Xiaochen's battle to the death. She glared at Xiaochen, and the murderous intent in her eyes was almost tangible. However, Xiaochen did not mind at all. He smirked coldly and met Bai Qiuran's eyes without backing down. The two of them stood facing each other. After a long silence, Bai Qiuran finally said, "Fine, I'll kill you in 3 months." Bai Qiuran suppressed the killing intent in her heart and turned around with a cold snort. "Let's go." She immediately left with her subordinates. As Bai Qiuran left, Yan Kunyo took a deep look at Xiaochen before leaving as well. The old servant beside Yinyangzi came up to Xiaochen and said with a smile, "Thank you for your help. Let's go. Master wants to see you." The master the old servant mentioned was naturally Yinyangzi. Xiaochen nodded and told Long Yang, Feng Zhu and the sacred palace people to leave first. He followed the old servant to Yinyangzi's residence. With Yinyangzi's declaration, the other factions wouldn't dare to openly attack the sacred palace faction. Xiaochen arrived at Yinyangzi's residence for the first time under the old servant's lead. There was an ethereal mountain peak that looked like a paradise. A simple thatched hut stood on top of the mountain peak. Outside the hut was a small courtyard. At first glance, it looked like the residence of an ordinary farmer. Moreover, not far from the thatched hut, there were a few vegetable fields. There were already many green vegetables growing in the fields. Who would have thought that this was Inyanzi's residence? The great sage actually lived in the same place as an ordinary farmer. Xiaochen arrived at the courtyard under the old servant's lead and saw Inyanzi sitting on a praying mat. Inyanzi slowly opened his eyes when Xiaochen arrived. He smiled and pointed to another praying mat in front of him. "Have a seat." He didn't exude any aura at all, just like an ordinary farmer. Xiaochen sat down in front of Inyanzi and took the initiative to cup his hands together. "Thank you for your help, ancestor." There's no need to thank me. You should thank yourself." Inyanzi smiled nonchalantly. Xiaochen didn't feel any pressure when he was with Inyanzi. It was as if he wasn't the great sage at all. He also didn't have the imposing aura of someone who had been in a high position for a long time. On the contrary, one could feel calmness, peace, and simplicity from Inyanzi. In other words, Inyanzi was like the warm sun. Xiaochen couldn't help but feel more relaxed when he was with him. At least, that was the case for Xiaochen right now. Xiaochen chatted with Inyanzi on and off, but it was only about trivial topics. Inyanzi sensed that Xiaochen seemed to have something to say, but he still smiled and said, "What's wrong? If you have something to say, just say it. There's no need to stutter." Xiaochen obviously had something on his mind, but he was too embarrassed to say it. Now that Inyanzi took the initiative to point it out, Xiaochen might as well just say it. "That patriarch, the 4 patriarchs of our sacred palace, they." Xiaochen wanted to ask about Xiaosheng's group of 4. Ever since Xiaochen returned, he hadn't seen Xiaosheng's group of 4. Previously, he heard from Qin Shuru that Xiaosheng's group of 4 had gone into seclusion. However, half a year had passed, and Xiaosheng's group of 4 still hadn't shown up today. This made Xiaochen suspicious. Upon hearing Xiaochen's words, Inyanzi smiled and said, "Don't worry, the 4 of them are still in seclusion, but they should be coming out soon." With that, Inyanzi waved his hand, and a mirror formed from spiritual energy appeared in front of Xiaochen. Through the mirror, Xiaochen saw the scene of Xiaosheng's group of 4 cultivating in seclusion. Seeing that Xiaochen's group of 4 was indeed in seclusion and wasn't in any danger, Xiaochen breathed a sigh of relief. In fact, Xiaochen didn't know that the reason why Xiaosheng's group of 4 cultivated so desperately was because they felt that their cultivation was too low. Although the 4 of them were quasi-sage great sovereigns, their cultivation was only at the initial stage of the quasi-sage stage. This kind of cultivation wasn't considered too high in the central world. To put it bluntly, in the central world, if a quasi-sage sect didn't have a great sovereign at the perfect stage of the quasi-sage stage overseeing it, it had almost no right to speak. Please collect, please vote, please recommend. Chapter 13:11. Xiao Sheng and the others also knew that their cultivation was still too low in the central world, especially as the strongest in a sect. They had no right to speak. In addition to having talented juniors, a sect must also have true experts. Talented juniors represented the future of a sect, while true experts could bring strength and peace to the sect. It was impossible to have only talented juniors without true experts. Of course, the opposite was also true. The current problem of the Sacred Palace was that they only had talented younger disciples, but no true powerhouse overseeing them. Compared to other quasi-saint sects, the cultivation of Xiao Sheng and the other 3 was indeed too low. The 4 of them were only at the initial stage of the quasi-saint realm. Therefore, Xiao Sheng and the others knew very well that what they needed to do the most now was to improve their strength. As for other things, they were just floating clouds. Because as long as Xiao Sheng and the others improved their strength, many things in front of them would be nothing more than floating clouds. Take the Bai family for example. If the Sacred Palace had a half-step great sage, would the Bai family dare to openly come to the Taiyang sect of Heavenly Yin to ask for people? Xiaochen also knew what Xiao Sheng and the others were thinking now. Moreover, after confirming that the four of them were only in closed-door cultivation and were not in any danger, Xiaochen was also relieved. That was good. No longer worried about Xiao Sheng and the others, Xiaochen asked Yangzi, Patriarch, there's one more thing I would like to ask about. It's about the power of laws. During the battle with Baichuran, Xiaochen discovered his two biggest weaknesses. One was the gap in martial skills, and the other was the gap in the power of laws. In fact, these two gaps could not be blamed on Xiaochen, because this was the embodiment of a lack of foundation. In the North Star boundary, the highest grade of martial skill was the Saint grade low level. There was nothing higher than that. As for the power of law, there was no perfect cultivation method. Compared to the North Star boundary, the Central World was far superior in these aspects. Let's talk about martial skills first. In the human territories of the Central World, as long as one had reached the level of a quasi-sage sect, almost all of them would have a mid-grade sage-level martial skill. It was just a matter of quantity. As for the cultivation of the power of law, the Central World had a complete system and cultivation method. Martial techniques and the power of laws were what Xiaochen needed to improve the most at the moment. Upon hearing Xiaochen's words, Yangzi smiled and said, I knew you would ask. You didn't know the meaning of the three realms of laws before, did you? Or perhaps you've never heard of the three realms of laws, right? Yes. The three realms of the laws. Upon hearing Yangzi's words, Xiaochen nodded honestly. He had indeed never heard of the three realms of the laws. He nodded honestly. Upon seeing this, Yangzi said slowly, in that case, before I tell you about the cultivation of the power of law, this old man will first tell you about the three realms of laws. The three realms of laws are actually the three realms of a martial artist's comprehension and control of the power of law. In the Central World, they are called the three realms of laws. In detail, they are divided into the worldly realm, the perceptive realm, and the transformative realm. The worldly realm is the entry level. It refers to the initial comprehension of the power of law, but is unable to control and use it flexibly. The perceptive realm refers to the initial comprehension of the power of law. It refers to the ability to use flexibly and skillfully control the power of law. As for the final transformative realm, it refers to the complete control of the power of law. It is no longer limited to the level of comprehension. After briefly explaining the differences between the three realms of laws for Xiaochen, Xiaochen had the most intuitive understanding of the three realms of laws after hearing Yangzi's words. With a thoughtful expression, he murmured softly, worldly realm, perceptive realm, transformative realm, three realms of laws. This was the first time Xiaochen had heard of the three realms of laws. After all, in the North Star realm, there was no such detailed system of the power of law. Everyone just relied on their feelings. After giving a simple and intuitive introduction to the three realms of laws for Xiaochen, Yangzi paused for a moment before continuing. As for your current comprehension of the power of development, it is only at the worldly realm. Although you have reached the limit of the worldly realm, you have not broken through to the perceptive realm. You are unable to skillfully use and control the power of law. Yangzi could tell at a glance what level Xiaochen's comprehension of the power of law was at. Upon hearing this, Xiaochen did not have any objections. After hearing Yangzi's words, Xiaochen also felt that his understanding of the power of law was indeed too shallow. Moreover, all these years, Xiaochen did not spend too much time and energy on comprehending the power of law. This was also one of the fundamental reasons why Xiaochen's comprehension of the power of law was only at the limit of the worldly realm. Previously, Xiaochen did not pay much attention to the power of law. However, after the battle with Baichuran, he softly experienced the terror of the power of law. The power was indeed so powerful that it made one's heart tremble. To put it bluntly, the reason why Baichuran could suppress Xiaochen now was more because of the gap between the power of law between the two of them. After a long silence, Xiaochen finally asked, Patriarch, do you know what level Baichuran's power of law is at? He's at the second level of the perceptive realm. However, he has not reached the peak and is still quite a distance away from the third level of the transformative realm. So he's at the second level of the perceptive realm. Upon hearing this, Xiaochen exhaled a mouthful of turbid air. However, there was a gap of one level. Baichuran's power of law was indeed completely crushing Xiaochen's power of law. This was undeniable. After knowing the three realms of the laws and the level of Baichuran's power of law, the next step was to explain how to cultivate the power of law. The central world did indeed have a complete system for cultivating the power of laws, but it didn't mean that a cultivator could easily comprehend and improve their power of laws just because they had such a system. To put it bluntly, the function of such a system was more of a guide. As for the specific cultivation method, it actually still depended on the individual's efforts, time, and effort to comprehend and understand. Therefore, even with the existence of such a system, it was not easy to comprehend or improve the power of laws. Of course, there were naturally many cultivation mystic realms in the central world that were dedicated to cultivating the power of law. Cultivating in them would naturally yield twice the results with half the effort. It could be said that he explained all kinds of knowledge about the power of law to Xiaochen without holding back. In the end, Yinyanzi looked at Xiaochen and said indifferently, "The Tianyin and Taiyang sects naturally have mystic realms dedicated to cultivating the power of laws, but they're not the best. If you want to break through to the second level of the power of laws as soon as possible, I can point you in the right direction. However, the choice is still up to you. Please collect, vote, recommend." You're tuning into the Mythic Realms YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.